In TFT, there are many artifacts and support items that all have different effects. Some of them are more powerful than others, but today I'm here to show you which ones are best and how to use each and every one of them. In this video, I talk about all of the trending artifacts and show you my personal tier list for the artifacts and support items so you know which ones do the best. Yo, my name is Main and I'm currently in low GM. I haven't grinded ranked as much recently, but I'm still aware of all the meta trends and I regularly watch high elo streamers. I also have reached Challenger at least once every set since set 8 and have played in a few tournaments this set with decent results, so I have that going for me. I actually wrote a 180-page artifact guide that you can check out by going to bit.ly/TFT artifact or checking it out for yourself in the description below. Basically, I go over every artifact and support item and talk about its best holders, tags, and everything you need to know about them. I think it's going to be a great supplement to this tier list, so please make sure you check that out. I posted it in the competitive TFT subreddit 2 weeks ago with pretty good reception, so make sure you check that out as well. And today I'm going to be talking about the patch 14.10b tier list and all of the different artifacts that goes with it. First, I'm actually going to go over all of the meta comps this patch. I think it's going to be very important to understand what comps are best, because if you understand what compositions perform the best in the meta, you'll also be able to know why certain artifacts are trending in stats and perform better in general. So you have the 3 most played comps, which basically defines the 4-cost meta. You have 4 Warden, 4 Snipers Ashe, you have Sage Lilia, and you have Duelist Lee Sin. Now, I think Duelist Lee Sin is currently the best comp in the game because right now the meta is you go fast 8 and roll for Lee Sin 2 and Aurelia instead of actually rerolling for Volley 3 or Trish 3. Further below, you can see the other 4-cost comps that did get nerfs. You have Faded, Syndra, and Ornn, who is still solid, uncontested, but isn't the best right now. Reason being they nerfed Syndra and Ornn in the B patch. Same goes for Kai'Sa. On the 14.10 patch, they nerfed a lot of her frontline with Sylas HP and spell nerfs and Galio HP nerfs. They also nerfed the 4 Trickshot trait overall, so she did take a big hit. Once you go down, you can also see the other reroll lines. For example, you have Umbral Alune Sylas, which is a fast 8 comp actually, where you hit Alune 2 and you stabilize off upgraded frontline. It's really good with Umbral +1. And you also have the premier 2-cost reroll comp right now, which is Ghostly, Zyra, and Shen. You can see that you actually got 7 for this comp for Zyra 3, Shen 3, and the chance to hit Morgana, where the comp spikes a lot. And the reason why I went over this is because other tier list websites generally agree with the stats. For example, I think TFT Academy by Frodan and Dishope, shout out to them, is one of the best resources for any players to be able to figure out what's the meta and what comps are the best. You can see that for the 4-cost lines, Lee Sin is the best, along with Sage Lilia and Warden Snipers. And then Syndra is not doing as well, same with Kai'Sa and Sage Sylas. However, they're still in the A tier and can definitely perform well given the conditions. You have stuff like Heavenly Kayn that isn't as good even with the emblem, and Porcelain Ashe. This is the old variant that basically got nerfs across the board. And yeah, the stats didn't show the real best comp in the game, which is Garen's Hero Augment 3rd Champion. It also has Lucky Paws over here as really good. You can see that a few of the artifacts this patch are particularly good with these two, which I'll cover later. So this is basically the meta snapshot. You can also see like the rear lines like Umbral Alune being pretty good, along with like maybe Bard with a certain artifact, which I'll cover later, Gnar with Silvermere Dawn. You can definitely check out more by clicking the link here or looking at basically anyone's tier list to understand more of the comps. But I wanted to show this to you guys to basically give you guys a rundown of the trends of all of these different artifacts compared to last patch. Now, let's start from the top with Corrupt Vampiric Scepter is currently performing better because they buffed it, and people actually figured out you can build it on Gnar and Aurelia. We can also see that stuff like Fishbones has a big increase in average placement because of his buffs, and one meta comp emerging, which is basically 4 Sniper, Ashe, and Aphelios. Putting this on them will make them incredibly good. You can see this in basically throughout the whole graphic, where if they buff artifacts or if certain compositions in the meta are buffed, you can definitely see their uptick in play rate as well as average placement. Blighting Jewel is now great on Morgana and Teemo. LUDEN'S Tempest got buffed. It's great on Lucky Paws, Zoe reroll, and it's actually pretty decent on high AP damage champions like Lilia. Talisman of Ascension didn't get buffed, but all of the hero augments basically got indirectly buffed because they buffed the actual champions themselves. So like I said earlier, Garen with his Story Champion and Kobuko with his Lucky Paws are great users of this artifact, so that explains why this is uptrending. We also have RFC that got buffed and is doing better in the meta just because duelists are doing fine, and this artifact is basically only good on Kiana. SEEKE'R's ARMGUARD got buffed and it actually makes Sylas a great unit, so that explains it. Unending Despair He got buffed. What a surprise. But it's okay in Ornn even though he got nerfs. But the reason why it's a lot better in the stats is because Illaoi got buffed. And guess what? She's used in the 4 Warden and 4 Sniper comps. I wanted to show this to you guys to basically emphasize that whenever the stats for an artifact becomes better, it's usually because a comp in the meta is buffed that supports the artifact really well with their different units, or they actually just get buffed. You can see here that there's 4 artifacts that have a lower average placement in general. You have Suspicious Trenchcoat, which is still really good, but they nerfed Ornn in the B patch, and they nerfed Silas and the 4 Bruiser frontline, as I said earlier. So that's why it suffered, I guess not a lot, but a decent amount in its average placement. The Collector is still really good on Ashe, but its best user overall was Kaisa and the Trickshot units. So it got slightly worse. Same with Innervating Locket with Ornn and Infinity Force with the Kayn nerfs. I mean, these are still all really good, but all of the different artifacts, you can definitely see a trend, and I guess use critical analysis and thinking of the different compositions to see why some are better. So enough yapping. I'm gonna actually get on to the tier list. Here's my artifact tier list for patch 14.10b, starting from the very top with Diamond Hands and ZHONYA'S Paradox, all the way at the bottom in Prowler's Claw. I also sorted all of these artifacts by their border colors. We have all the green artifacts as tank, hybrid as this purple color, for example, ZHONYA'S and I say SEEKE'R's ARMGUARD. We have AP, which is light blue, AD, which is orange, and attack speed, which is yellow. I also made sure to add a few cool stickers in the top or bottom right to see if any of the artifacts are trending upwards or have been buffed or nerfed recently. So anyways, I'm gonna go through all these artifacts one by one, and first let's start with Diamond Hands. First, let's get over Diamond Hands, which is considered the best artifact in the game. If you can see over here, it has an average placement of 4.1. The reason why it's so good is because it gives you 1 gold a round. At 50% health, units become invulnerable for 0.5 seconds and grant you 1 gold. It also gives decent tank stats with plus 25 AP and 400 health. And 1 gold doesn't seem that much, but in a meta where a lot of the comps are fast 8 and are super contested, it is extremely important to actually be able to hit these units, and having a decent tank artifact with that gold generation effect can snowball your econ, and it will allow you to hit all these units easier. If you want to play something like Lee Sin, Lilia, like this artifact will just enable you to hit faster with all those econ intervals. Now, it's important to note that Diamond Hands is a lot better when taken 2-1. You can see in the screenshot, at 2-1, this is a patch ago, it averaged at 3.96, and at 3-2, it's a lot worse. Make sure that when picking gold generation artifacts, you want to be picking them at 2-1, because you want to utilize the gold effect that they give to be able to snowball your econ. Now, the holders don't really matter that much for Diamond Hands. Early game, the most important thing is actually making sure your units can proc it. So like any comp like Garen, Yasuo, Rek'Sai, any tank, just put it on them. And I think it's really good to solo frontline them so that they take all the focus fire from the enemies, and it's gonna proc the 1 gold once your unit reaches 50% health. Now, you can get grief sometimes if, let's say, the enemy is playing Fortune and they don't do any damage. Your Diamond Hands won't proc, but this shouldn't be an issue for the most part because open forting isn't in the meta anymore. So just put this on any primary tank that can proc Diamond Hands, and make sure that you make your econ intervals that you gain from the extra gold. A really cool interaction with Diamond Hands is actually Suspicious Trenchcoat. Now, if you get this combination, you're actually a cheater, because if your unit reaches 50% health with Trenchcoat and Diamond Hands, the clones will also spawn these, and each instance of the clone will be able to spawn Diamond Hands. I'm going to insert a clip of Leduc showcasing this interaction, but it's really broken if you manage to get this. But yeah, in general, the holders for Diamond Hand don't really matter. The most important thing will be making sure that you can utilize the 1 gold around that will stem from the artifact, and that you'll put it on basically any tank late game. The value of this artifact will come from proccing that gold as early as possible. So if you get this 2-1, I take it in a heartbeat. Now, to prove to you that this is broken, you can actually go to PBE section on tactics.tools and see that it's getting nerfed next patch. Minus 100 health. So yeah, it's overstated, it's getting nerfed. Pick this artifact when you can. It's the best artifact in the game. The next artifact we're going to be talking about is ZHONYA'S Paradox. Now you can actually see over here that ZHONYA'S is a 4.22. It's one of the best AP artifacts in the game. And the big reason is it's good on a lot of the 4-cost carries like Syndra, Silas, Lilia, and AP legendaries. ZHONYA'S gives your units 45 AP, 30 armor, and MR, so it's decent resistances along with a good amount of AP. The most important part of ZHONYA'S is its passive ability, once per combat at 40% health, become invulnerable and untargetable for 3 seconds. The most important part here is noticing that unlike Diamond Hands, it makes your units untargetable, which means that if you put this on a tank and it reaches the 40% HP threshold, it's actually gonna leave your team and drop all aggro, similar to the items Edge of Night. So really don't be putting this on any of your tanks. It's meant to be a carry damage item, so the best holders will be what I mentioned earlier. The worst holders will actually be Morgana. I'll explain why it isn't good in here later. And stuff like Annie and Pure Tanks. People build this artifact a lot on Annie, but straight up it's not good. So early game, you just really want to be putting ZHONYA'S Paradox on most of your upgraded AP units. Ari is a really good one because she's faded and she can do a lot of damage and be tanky with the faded resistances and pairings. Darius is also good because he's a really good duelist. He likes AP and resistances. You really just put this on anyone. Kog'Maw, Zyra, Zoe, any AP unit. Lux will work. Janna will work. Invokers, anyone. Late game, when you have ZHONYA'S, you want to envision this on these 4-cost carries mainly. Syndra is going to be really good with ZHONYA'S, and although she got nerfed in 14.10, it's a really good item on her, and I'd say transforms her to become a really good unit. The main reason is Syndra scales with every ultimate ability with her butterflies and gains 1 upon every cast. So the concept of going infinite is important with ZHONYA'S because oftentimes when a backline unit with ZHONYA'S gets to 40% health, they'll proc that threshold and they'll mostly be the last one standing. If Syndra's the last one standing with ZHONYA'S, she'll actually be able to ult the other team and potentially clutch out fights. You've seen how some Syndras can clutch out some really close fights just by living long enough and stalling and being able to nuke the other team. So you can see over here, if I sort by 5 faded, ZHONYA'S is going to be a really good item on Syndra with a minus 0.47 delta. And it's really interesting to note as well that when building Syndra with ZHONYA'S, you really want to be building blue buff on her, of course, because it's her best management item. Plus, Nashers are a damage item, right? Like, the best builds on ZHONYA'S will be basically blue buff plus damage amplifier plus the artifact itself. Reason being, if you rely on like double mana gen, you just won't have enough AP, right? Because ZHONYA'S does give 45, but it's not a lot compared to something like Rabadon's or how much uptime you can get from Nashers. So make sure you build correctly when you have ZHONYA'S and Syndra. Next we have Sylas. Sylas is going to be a really good user of ZHONYA'S as our premier battle mage, the mage seeker himself. Sylas is super tanky and is basically a hybrid unit with the damage he provides and how tanky he can be in certain compositions. Now Sylas is primarily played either in a Sage setup where you have Sage Sylas. This was nerfed and isn't as effective this patch, but players like Mismatch Socks are really good with it, so I highly recommend watching him if you want to learn more Sylas. But yeah, ZHONYA'S is really good because it provides everything that Sylas wants, right? Sylas wants AP because he scales with AP, and his healing scales with AP, as well as resistances. Now, if you have ZHONYA'S and Sylas, you generally want to be building, you know, Sylas's good items, namely Crown Guard, Spark, and Adaptive Hum. I see this trap a lot where a few players think that BT, Titans, Hodge is Bis Sylas. Sometimes you have to build it, but if you can greed it, you generally want to go something like Adaptive Hum, Crown Guard, Spark specifically, or even Archangels or pure AP, because he already has healing in his kit, and you just want to amplify the healing even more by giving him AP. So his best builds with something like ZHONYA'S Paradox will be like ZHONYA'S plus Adaptive Helm Spark, ZHONYA'S Crown Guard, any mix and match, right? Like, the average placement drops dramatically if you build like a BT when he has ZHONYA'S already. So just keep that in mind. Sylas is also played in the 4 Bruiser variant along with Kai'Sa. It's still going to be good on him. Like, in that variant, you won't have him as a primary carrier. You'll typically put leftover tank items on him if you upgrade him. But even in this variant, ZHONYA'S is still good. So it's just a really solid item on Sylas that I recommend building on him. Next, we have Lilia. I don't think ZHONYA'S is as good on Lilia as these other two, but it's still a really solid item because in patch 14.10, they basically made it so that she has aimbot and it can consistently target the enemy backline. Lilia is my favorite unit, and before 14.10, trust me, she missed a lot. So building ZHONYA'S on her was terrible. But now in a setup such as Sage Lilia, it's actually an okay item on her. It's not her best artifact for sure, but it can definitely pop off and she can win a few fights by ulting and basically nuking the enemy backline, right? Like, if you compare this to Lilia from 14.9b before the buffs, I'll remove the Sage filter because she wasn't played in that variant back then. It was trash. It's a lot better now that she's played in a better comp and a better unit in general. Even if you sort by, for example, 5 mythic variants or vertical mythic, it becomes even better, right? Because she'll get more AP, which amplifies the ZHONYA'S effect. And yeah, she'll be able to utilize it better. So it's definitely a solid item on Lilia, depending on what comp you play in. I'd recommend it. Next we have Zoe. I mean, Zoe's going to be primarily played either in Vertical Arcanist or as a duo carry in Ghostly Zyra. Just imagine Zoe stacking up ricochets and being the last one alive and being able to get a few more casts and kill the whole enemy team. Obviously, Zoe 3 is a bit hard to get to, but if you manage to get there, it's going to be a solid option on her, right? Like, if you're doing the Ghostly setup or whatever, it's going to be decent. So, Arcanist, Ghostly, Zoe is going to be good. And then, lastly, I'll talk about Hui and Azir. Now, don't get me wrong, it's definitely good on these guys, but Azir and Hui can sometimes struggle because their mana thresholds are so high that sometimes they struggle to cast, even after being the last one alive, right? Remember what I said about the concept of going infinite with your units? Sometimes when Hui or Azir is the last one alive, they can struggle to cast, especially without a mana item. So maybe it won't be as effective on them, but if they're upgraded and you have a good setup and items around them, it's definitely solid. Stuff like Udyr and Wukong won't like it as much because, you know, they're both Wukong's AD and Udyr already has inbuilt invulnerability. But yeah, these should be the best holders of ZHONYA'S Paradox, these four. Now let's talk about some of the bad holders of ZHONYA'S Paradox. We have Morgana. Now, it's actually pretty commonly built, not as much as like the good users, thankfully, but it's actually pretty commonly built on Morgana. And the reason why it's not as good on her is because remember the concept I said of going infinite? Morgana really likes utility items usually, or mana gen, such as Adaptive Helm, Blue Buff, stuff like that, Morello, Shiv. And the AP is fine on her, but she won't really utilize the passive effect of ZHONYA'S invulnerability that well. I noted in my guide that imagine Morgana being the last unit alive, swarmed by enemies, and her trying to kill the enemy team. Sometimes she'll just miss straight up, and sometimes she just won't kill anything, unlike units like Syndra or Lily, right? So although it's not like the most egregious thing I've seen, I would definitely not build it on Morgana. And then just the other holders in general are kind of no-brainers. I don't put ZHONYA'S Paradox on any of your tanks, please, because they're gonna drop aggro at 40% HP and leave your team. And for units like Kayn and Wukong and Melee, although this item technically functions like Edge of Night, they don't really enjoy AP because these are 80 units. And the resistances are fine, but it's not the most optimal item on them. So these are probably going to be the worst holders for ZHONYA'S. So the next artifact we have is Eternal Winter. Now this is a strong tank item that currently has an average of 4.19. Historically, it's been known as the Rat artifact. It's super strong because its effect basically chills enemies that damage the holder for 1.5 seconds. Chills means that their attack speed will be lowered. And then after a unit gets chilled 7 times from the item, they get stunned. So it can definitely neutralize a lot of carries, especially attack damage carries like Ashe, Bard, for example. It's a really annoying artifact to play against. The artifact gives okay stats, 20 armor and 200 health. Isn't the best, but the value definitely comes from the chill and the stun. Now, Eternal Winter, the most important thing when playing this artifact is definitely positioning. Now, it's definitely a great artifact with a good effect. But if you're playing Eternal Winter and you position poorly, the artifact's value is not that good. So try your best to position your tanks same side as enemy carries. Like for example, in this one, we have an Annie 2 with Eternal Winter, blocking Kai'Sa directly and making sure that she's stunned in the beginning of the fight. Make sure you're same side. We also have the concept of solo frontlining with Eternal Winter. Basically, early game, you really want to be solo frontlining your tank with Eternal Winter because you want to stun the whole enemy team. In early game, there isn't that many disruptions or CC threats that can compromise solo frontlining positioning. So something like this is totally acceptable. Lastly, Eternal Winter can counter some comps pretty hard, specifically melee comps, because if your melee unit gets stuck on a Winter, you're basically screwed if you don't have any sort of big burst damage or CC immunity. So as an example, in this graphic, you dodge the Eternal Winter and your Kayn is able to walk up to the Gnar and effectively chew through the front line without getting hit by this Thrust 3. Now, obviously, it's going to be really hard to get good positioning every round, but just try your best to be mindful. Eternal Winter does get countered by Quicksilver Sash and stuff like Banshee's Veil, which gives CC immunity, or the Augment Silver Veil, but people don't pick it as much, so it's not something you should be playing around. Early game, you just want to be putting this on basically any tank. Garen, Umu, Illaoi, Rek'Sai, Shen, like basically your tankiest unit, and you should probably be pairing them with other tank items. Solo frontlining is effective because you'll get focus fire from the whole enemy team, and it's going to provide a lot of value. Now, the important thing is late game, solo frontlining can be bad unless you really know what you're doing, because there's so many threats. For example, Eternal Winter is a pretty good item on Nautilus because he's tanky and got buffed in the new 4 Warden comp with 4 snipers. But for example, let's say you're playing against a duelist comp, In the lobby sees you have a Winter that you're solo frontlining. They can play something like a Lissandra and just screw your whole team over. So solo frontlining isn't the best late game. I'd only recommend doing it early game for most value. But yeah, this artifact is pretty simple. Put it on your tankiest unit. The holders don't really matter as much. That's pretty bad stats on Annie, but that's just because I think she isn't the tankiest right now after her HP nerfs. But like, it's good on Galio or Nautilus. Really good on Ilawi. This is because of the 4 warding comp. But yeah, just put it on any tank, really. It's a really simple artifact. It's really annoying to play against, but it provides great value because it can effectively neutralize the damage of the enemy team, especially if you position it correctly. So yeah. Alright, so next we have the artifact Sniper's Focus. This is a hybrid DPS item that works well on backline carries. We can currently see that it averages a 4.29, and I put it in grade tier simply because it is absolutely broken with one of the premier AP carries in the meta right now. It's important to note that you can get Sniper's Focus from the Augment Longshot, which grants you a Sniper's Focus upon your sniper units attacking a total distance of 1200 hexes. You can also get 3 Sniper's Focus from the Augment called the Chaos. You have a 1 in 10 chance of getting this specific reward where you get 3 Sniper's Focus. And when people get this reward in my ranked games, I usually see them putting it on Irelia or spreading them on their like trickshot units, for example. Sniper's Focus gives your units 15% AD, attack speed, and AP, hence its classification as a hybrid DPS item. The most important part is that it gives 9% damage per hex between the holder and their target, and it gives 1 attack range, although the attack range isn't as important. I think that early game, you can really put Sniper's Focus on any backline DPS. Obviously, you want to utilize the hex range damage amplification, so try not to put it on your melee units, but I would put it on stuff like Caitlyn, Ophelio, Sivir, Senna, any of the early snipers. Even things like Kog'Maw would be different, Teemo, Zyra, like any backline unit should work. Now let's get on to the actual holders. I think Lilia is by far the best holder of Sniper's Focus. The biggest reason being they actually fixed her targeting so that she doesn't miss every half ultimate, and her orbs will have like almost an aimbot effect sometimes to the enemy backline. Sniper's Focus is going to be really potent on Lilia no matter what configuration you build her in. In the Sage variant, which is the most popular, Vertical Mythic Invokers, it's going to be really good. Here we have her stats when built in the Sage variant, here in a Vertical Mythic setup, here in Vertical Invokers, although this one isn't as popular. I'm going to put a graphic on the screen that shows you how Lilia's ult works, shout out. But basically she selects like 1 of 3 units depending on which one is the most clump, and she chooses 1 of those 3 units and then throws her orb. That will help you position Lilia best. But basically, Sniper is OP on Lilia because she can reach the enemy hex corner and deal massive damage. So I highly recommend putting it on her. Next we have Ashe. Ashe is very interesting because she is a sniper, and right now the artifact is really good at her, but that's mainly because of the buffs to the 4 sniper trait. They massively increased the hex amplification bonus from 4 sniper. So if you actually look at Ashe's stats from patch 14.9b, this artifact was straight up terrible on her. And the main reason being Ashe was really carried by the fact that the 4 porcelain breakpoint was a bit broken, as well as Lissandra. They basically almost gutted her by nerfing Lissandra's throw ability. And they also nerfed a lot of the things around the porcelain comp, such as Annie, Lissandra, and the trait itself. So currently Ashe is played in the 4 Warden 4 Sniper comp, and because the damage amplification is super good now, or something maybe got fixed within the interaction between Sniper's Focus and the Sniper trait, it's a really good item on Ashe. She'll actually decimate backlines if you manage to put this, and obviously build stuff like Gwyncy's Rageblade on her. So yeah, I highly recommend putting Sniper's Focus on Ashe. It's one of her best artifacts by far. Next we have Xayah and Kai'Sa. Now, don't get fooled by this delta metric on Kai'Sa. I think historically, Sniper's Focus has been okay on her, and it's always been really broken on Xayah in the stats. However, if you actually filter Kai'Sa in her 4 trickshot setup, it's a decent artifact on her. I don't know why. It says it's bad on her here. This is probably because the 4 trickshot comp and Kai'Sa in general isn't as good. But if you manage to carry around her and put it on either Kai'Sa or Xayah, it's going to be a good, solid artifact on her. So yeah, I'd recommend putting Sniper's Focus on these 2, as their ultimates can definitely devastate the backline. Kai'Sa with her torrential waves can reach heavy parts of the backline and do a lot of splash damage with trickshot. And Xayah with her feathers can literally draw a straight line and then pull the feathers backwards, dealing massive damage. Syndra is interesting. I don't think it's like the best artifact on her, but it's definitely acceptable if you like lower your damage artifacts and you're playing the 5 Faded 4 Dried comp or whatever, or maybe even using Syndra as an item holder or an extra carry unit when playing the 4 sniper for Warden comp, and you have Syndra as your level 9 unit, it's like decent on her. The thing is, Syndra can actually reach backline if she's like the last one alive with her ultimate. She can throw her butterflies. Have you guys ever seen like a Syndra, like for example, target like an enemy here, and the butterflies ricochet? Because of the +1 increase hex range, she can actually reach the backline unit. So it's definitely not the best artifact on her because it doesn't give her that much AP, but it's a solid option. Next, we have these users who are also pretty good, but kind of more niche. Kog'Maw historically has been a really good user of Sniper's Focus, as he is a sniper, and he basically gains increased attack range every 3 casts, and by the end of a fight with your Cho'Gath 3 and Kog'Maw 3, you'll be able to nuke the enemy backline. Kog'Maw's biz is really specific though. It's always been blue buff plus Nashers and a last damage item, so Sniper's Focus perfectly fits the archetype of being a hybrid item that provides insane damage boost to Kog'Maw. So I'd look to build these 3 specific items. Trojan is fine, but blue buff is so much better. And then we have Irelia. Irelia is just a really good unit because duelists are popular right now, and her blades twirl around the map, so you already know it's gonna be a really good artifact on Irelia. Like, I have seen Irelias with 3 sniper focus, specifically from the Call to Chaos augment, and it can hit like a truck, even though it's not like the best combination. So yeah, I mean, it isn't the best in the stats, but it can definitely work well on her. Now let's talk about the worst holders to Sniper's Focus. First, we have Morgana, and while it isn't the worst artifact on her, it's certainly not good because her damage is DOT and spreads in a pretty wide like snowflake formation, and I don't think she benefits that much from the hybrid stats compared to some of the other users. Morgana, as I said earlier, likes utility items and stuff like Adaptive Helm, Shiv, Morello, sometimes even pure damage, so Sniper's Focus isn't the biggest value on her. Then we have Tristana. Straight up, just conceptually, it doesn't make sense because Tristana jumps towards the backline or towards anyone she targets, so Sniper's Focus gives damage amplification based on Hex. Tristana jumps towards units, so it's anti-synergy, and it's just not a good item on her. If you're playing Sniper's Focus in Duelist, just build it on Irelia if you can. And then, same concept with Salus, Kayn, and any of the melee units. Any of their stats with Snipers, I promise you it's horrible. The sample size is so low because conceptually, even though it does give them that one range, it's not like RFC used to be. It's just not a good item on melee units because the value really comes from hex range separation, and while the units can attack like 2 hexes away from a target, it's definitely not gonna get any value. So yeah, don't build it on melee units. Alright, so the next artifact we'll have in the grade tier is actually MANAZANE. MANAZANE currently averages a 4.27, and it's a pretty good artifact with few AP and 80 carries. And what's interesting about MANAZANE is that it grants 15% AD attack speed, 10 AP, and 15 mana. It is a hybrid item despite looking like a quite magical item from League of Legends. MANAZANE has a special ability where it gives a unit 120 mana over 5 seconds after casting the first time in combat. This means that good holders of MANAZANE will usually have a really impactful ultimate ability. The mana threshold doesn't matter as much. The thing that is more important is the relationship between MANAZANE and a certain unit's ult and ability. So I'm gonna go over like how they interact with all of the best holders and worst holders later. The best holders are currently Lilia, Teemo, Kai'Sa, and Hui. Worst holders are Morgana and Syndra, and there's gonna be a few more I'm gonna talk about. So let's go right into that. Let's talk about early game holders. I think that for the most part, AP holders who like MANAZANE more early just because their ultimates are generally more impactful than the early game AD holders. Caitlyn is like the one exception, but she does have a high mana cost, so it's gonna let her ult once more. It's not bad on her. Look for units like Ahri, Zoe Kindred, Alun, Zyra. Basically, any unit that has an impactful ultimate, like these 5 in particular, but Teemo's a really good holder actually that I didn't include initially. Something like Soraka could work maybe. Lux as well. Like, getting that ultimate earlier for these units are just pretty valuable in general, so don't be too picky about the holder. So now let's talk about some good holders for MANAZANE mid to late game. First start bottom left, Lilia is the best holder for MANAZANE currently. She's like, as I said earlier, one of the premier metacomps. After her targeting buff, she can actually look at units and eviscerate them. It has really good stats on Lilia, whether you play M3 Sage, Vertical Mythic, Vertical Invoker. And for example, it's actually interesting to note that MANAZANE on Lilia actually used to be bad. Reason being, Lilia being a 50 mana unit can get about like 2.5 extra casts in MANAZANE plus the auto attack, so like 3 extra faster casts. This unit used to miss so much before patch 14.10, so it was awful. Now it's actually good in her because she will throw a lot of her orbs on the backline, and she has the potential to completely eviscerate backline units. So MANAZANE is just a great option here. When you build MANAZANE, you probably want to pair it with pure damage items. I don't think you really want like Shojin on Lilia in general. You'd rather have something like Blue Buff, JG, damage amplification, Archangel Staff, Rabadon, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a great item on her. So next we have Kai'Sa, and I guess Teemo as well, because I'll group it in. Trick shots generally have really impactful ultimates because they're the reason they're able to spread their ricochet ability. Kai'Sa with her waves, if she ults a lot, she'll be able to spread damage a lot more. And if you look at her ability, she'll actually do more damage if an enemy is hit by 10 waves or more. So a lot of concentrated casts will definitely help Kai'Sa's damage output. Same with Teemo. Like, he has a really low mana pool, but all his ultimates are impactful, combined with the fact that if you have trick shots with him, whether if you're rerolling Teemo or just have him as a 2-star unit in like a 4 trick shot Kai'Sa fast 8 board, it's gonna be really good. Stats are really good on Kai'Sa with 4 trick shot for MANAZANE because of her ultimate, and same thing with Teemo as well. These two are really solid holders. Now last one is Sway. He's gonna be a bit hard to get to, but his ultimate is really expensive to cast, 105 mana, but it basically spreads across nearly the whole map. And usually when you play Hui, you want him as your red buff or Morello holder. He can spread anti-heal to the whole enemy team. So pairing MANAZANE with Hui will make him cast instantaneously. He'll actually do decent damage and also do healing to your unit. So it's just a really good combination. I don't think MANAZANE is as good on the other legendaries like Lissandra and Azir, just because they specifically nerfed Lissandra and Azir. Yeah, extra soldier casts are nice, but I think he just prefers other like either pure damage items or a Spear Shojin on him. We also have these 3 specific reroll AP units. They all have impactful ults, but sometimes they can be hard to get to. As I said earlier, a Loon 3 is pretty hard to get because usually you're fast 8ing with the Umbral comp. Same with Zoe and Zyra, you're going to be rolling at 7 for these two in the Ghostly Zyra comp. But rest assured, if you hit these units 3-star, MANAZANE is really good on them. You can obviously have them 2-star and still do well, but specifically at 3-star, these units become really good with MANAZANE because Zoe can farm her ricochets, Alun can execute a lot, and Zyra will be able to spread her plans really quickly. Next we have Morgana. Actually, I don't want to say it's good in her, but I wouldn't call it terrible as well. The reason being, her mana pool is really low and she can cast really fast and basically spread her ultimate ability to a lot of the enemy team, which can cause chill. And usually you're going to have something like a Morello or red buff on her to spread anti-heal similar to Wei. The problem is, even though they fixed her targeting, I swear sometimes she can still be inconsistent. So if a unit like Morgana just wastes her ult on the same thing, the DOT is fine, but you'd rather have her spread across the whole enemy team, right? Like, it's definitely not a bad artifact. Like, it's just very mid. It's just really mid on her. It's like fine. I wouldn't consider it anything special. All right, so next we have Syndra. This is like the biggest sin I've seen from a few players do. If you look at MANAZANE stats, it's actually the 5th most built out of all of the MANAZANE holders. We have Loya, who's really good, Morgana, who's okay, Azir is also okay, Kai'Sa, who's really good. Guys, this artifact is trash on Syndra. It's conceptually, maybe it makes sense because she's low mana cost and you can get her to have a lot of scaling, but I swear she's bugged with MANAZANE because there's something about mana lock and how units interact. Syndra, when she casts her ult, like stands still and like obviously throws her butterflies to the other team. So I feel like she gets mana locked, and I've seen reports on Discord where she has potential like weird mana interactions with mana overflow. Just don't build it on her. It's just terrible. Syndra, MANAZANE, Whis. Don't build it on her, period. Other like bad holders, I guess, is these aren't that popular, but I'll just add them here for fun. Kindred, she's low mana. Like, she likes casting her ultimate, but you'd rather have something like either a blue buff on her to actually reduce her mana threshold to like 20, or like just pure damage, or Morello. It's not that good. Bard, bro, if you build MANAZANE on Bard, great. Like, it's just the biggest troll in the world. Like, this guy only likes Quinsus and Gunblade, I'm pretty sure, and maybe a few other attack speed items. Just don't build it. And Nautilus, it's also like decently built on him, actually. Like 224 pillars and Master built it. Like, I know you want the Nautilus to cast a lot, but like, you just want the man to live longer, bro. Like, I'd rather have you put this MANAZANE on a good AP carry, not named Syndra, like Morgana or Lilia or Azir, or like just any AP carry, and then put it on this guy because it doesn't give him any tankiness. And sure, once he casts, which will take super long because he already has 160 mana, once he casts, it won't even fill the bar up to full. Like, maybe, but yeah, it's just not that good. Just build tank items on this guy. So for our last artifact in the great tier, we have Mittens. Now, Mittens currently averages a 4.29, and there's one big reason why I'm going to tell you. You can kind of see him right here. Mittens gives your unit 60% attack speed, which is a lot, but the biggest value of the item comes from its utility effects. Mittens visually shrinks the holder of the artifact, but also grants them increased movement speed, 20% DR, and immunity to chill. Just by reading these utility effects, you can tell that they'll be really beneficial for melee units. I think that melee units will really benefit from the damage reduction since they'll be taking brunt force of the attacks from the other team, and immunity to chill from sources like Eternal Winter or Morgana's ultimate is always really nice. Important to note that shrinking the holders is visual. Like there is a Leduc video on that talks about it called Size Doesn't Matter, so do check that out. For the best holders for Mittens, we have Lee Sin, Qiyana, Gnar, and Kayn. It's just most melee units. And for the worst holders, we have Sylas, backline units like Ashe or Syndra, and tanks like Amumu. Do not recommend putting it on any of these guys. A really random cool interaction is Mittens gives 60% attack speed, and Tiny But Deadly, the prismatic augment, gives your team a 50% smaller visual appearance, but a 30% boost in attack speed. I think this is applied to attack speed post like overall calculations, so your units will just attack really fast. 60% attack speed and then 30% faster. If you put Mittens on something like a Qiyana 3 or like a Lee Sin 2 in vertical duelist, and then you have Tiny But Deadly, it's just really funny. They're gonna move really fast. Highly recommend you try it at least once. Alright, so now let's get on to the early game holders. Basically, for the most part, you want to be putting this on early game melee units. For example, we have Darius, Qiyana, Volibear. The duelists will all use Mittens as well. Even though duelists don't really like direct attack speed items because it already comes in their kit, they really like Mittens because of the damage reduction, which they do activate once you reach 6 duelists or 8 duelists, and immunity to chill. And early game, this much attack speed can be really overwhelming for early game carries and tanks to withstand, so highly recommend putting it on duelists. You can put it on other frontline carries like Gnar or Riven. You can put it on other frontline early game carries like Gnar or Riven, and if you reroll them, obviously you keep it on them. But if not, you can transition out. It's important to note that while I don't really like it on like backline carries, I guess early game it could be okay. Like something like a Sivir, a Lux, and Ahri, like 60% attack speed is it's a sizable amount early game. So although you'd really prefer it on melee units, I wouldn't hate putting it this early game on like a few backline units. All right, so now let's talk about the best holders of Mittens. I'm gonna focus on the middle mainly because Lee Sin is the reason why this artifact's win rate and overall placement became so much higher. People finally realized that you don't have to reroll duelists at level 7, and instead you can push level 8 for Lee Sin and Irelia. So in a vertical duelist setup, Lee Sin will just really enjoy this artifact. Gives him damage reduction. Attack speed is like not the best on duelist, like I said, but 60% is sizable. Combine that with the fact that you already have stacking DR from the duelist trait, and this guy's just gonna attack really fast. He'll actually just run over enemy teams. Look to build something like a... When you have Mittens on Lee Sin, just look to build something like a Titans and like survivability, like Sterak's or like Sterak's Gauge or Titans, was really good, and you just have a really insane build. Now, the same goes for Kayn. I know Kayn isn't in the meta right now because they nerfed him over and over again after his dominance, that one patch in the Heavenly setup before they changed the trait completely. It's still good on him, don't get me wrong, because he excels in vertical Heavenly setups. He's not the best right now, but it's still a solid item to put if you ever just have a Kayn carry or you're playing him along with the Heavenly units. It's just going to be great for any melee carry in general. So like even carries like Set and Wukong will definitely utilize Mittens well. Just remember, it's all about the damage reduction, the immunity to chill, and the attack speed. Like all of those compounded will definitely make it a solid item for any melee units. Then in top left here, you can see the different melee reroll comps. Like, I don't think it's that good on Yone, but like it's really good on these 2-cost reroll comps because Gnar will really like the attack speed and the damage reduction. So if you play him in the now less popular Ghostly Gnar, he's gonna pop off. Riven is actually secret tech. Riven is actually a pretty cool unit with Mittens because she'll attack really fast. Usually you won't be rerolling her as a primary carry. Like you'll probably see her just as a random 3-star unit, maybe in Ghostly Zyra, but if you ever have a 6 bruiser Riven setup, Mittens is not bad on her. Same with Qiyana. Like usually it's gonna be pretty difficult to hit a Qiyana 3-star because of all the duelist players, but if you have a Qiyana, for example, if you have a Qiyana and put her in a duelist setup, this item like can pop off, man. She's gonna just attack so fast. So just build her kind of similar to Lee Sin. Like I low-key like stuff like Hodge and Edge of Night more on Qiyana than Lee Sin, but like anything should work. 1 healing, mittens, and like a random AD bruiser item like Sterak's Gauge, Titan's Resolve, Giant Slayer, Quicksilver Sash, anything. So these, any melee unit, just look to put mittens on. It's right now, it's just really boosted by the fact that duelists are probably the best comp in the game after Garen's Story Champion. So make sure to look out for this artifact. So remember how I said most melee units? If I were to nitpick one that it isn't that good in, it's probably Sylas. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's unbuildable on him. But as I told you earlier, Sylas really likes either like pure AP or like some sort of blend of resistances, right, with tank items. Mittens gives attack speed, which I'm pretty sure isn't the best stat on Sylas. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, it's like okay on him, but like the stats aren't the best. I probably wouldn't prioritize it, but if he's your primary carry and you need to round off a third item, go for it. Now, Mittens does get egregious when you build them on backline units. I know it gives 60% attack speed and units like Ashe really like it, but like but the way you want to think about this artifact is if you build Mittens on Ashe just for attack speed, it's basically a worse Guinsoo's after a few casts. Like, Ashe can't really utilize the damage reduction, the immunity to chill that well, so it's basically a worse normal item. Yeah, like if you look in the stats over here, it's a plus 0.30. It's not that good. Like stuff like Syndra, Ashe, a few backliners, I don't think it's particularly good. Like it could work maybe. Like it could be a very like mid option, but I would never call it good. Also, mittens on tanks is interesting because they get the damage reduction, but I don't think a lot of tanks really like attack speed, so it's probably just a wasted stat on them. Like if we look at the most popular holders for mittens, we can see stuff like Lee Sin, Sylas, so I don't think it's that good with him. It's just okay. Wukong, Set are really good with mittens. Kayn, these stats are just bad just because he got nerfed and isn't that popular right now outside of Heavenly. Yeah, stuff like Ashe isn't good, Nautilus isn't good, Annie isn't that good. Like the damage reduction is decent, but it's definitely not something you should prioritize putting on your tanks unless you really have to. Put it on Lee Sin and Duelist right now if you can. Alright, now I'm going to be talking about the artifacts in the good tier. First, we have the Collector, which is an 80 artifact. Currently, it averages a 4.32, so it's pretty solid. They did nerf one of its best holders in Kai'Sa, but buffed Ashe in a way because they buff Wardens and Snipers, so it is like an overall net neutral. This artifact gives your units 20% AD and 30% crit. The Collector makes units, attacks, and abilities execute enemies below 12% of their max health, but more importantly, this is a gold generation artifact, so all executions will have a 40% chance to drop 1 gold. Now, as with all gold generation artifacts, this is a lot stronger if taken 2-1 because it's balanced around the fact that it can give you gold with its executions. So this was last patch, but it averaged a 4.04 when taken at 2-1, 4.6 when taken at 3-2, and 4.85 when taken at 4-2. Now, you can see it's the same concept this patch as well. It's a lot better 2-1 if you pick it from Portable Forge than something like 4-2. It's also important to note that Gold Collector has historical synergy with the item Infinity Edge. This is because Gold Collector grants you crit, and Infinity Edge makes units' abilities crit as well. So a historical build that I've always known was pretty good is Last Whisper plus IE plus Collector, because it grants your unit, I think, an almost 100% crit threshold, and it's just a really solid combo because it provides you with Shred, crit, and AD, which is everything that a backline attack damage carry wants. So Kai'Sa is a prime example of this. When she was a lot more meta, this was like a really good build on her, and it was insane. Last Whisper Collector is still good in her now, but the stats won't be as good this patch because they nerfed the trick shots and basically her whole front line, but it's still an insane combo on her if you get it. Also important to note that the Collector has good synergy with Runons. This is because the bolts that Runons will proc will actually execute enemies once they're low. So let's say Caitlyn's attacking a tank from the enemy, and then there's a unit in the back line. So for an example, if Caitlyn's attacking the enemy Yasuo and the Ahri is low, the Runon's bolt can actually proc up on the Ahri and execute her if she's 12% or low health. This also will work with items like Static Shiv and stuff like DOT, but generally units that have these things or build Shiv are AP, and as I said earlier, Collector is not good on AP units. The best holders of Collector will be Ashe, Kai'Sa, and Irelia, and the worst holders will be frontline units like Kayn, AP champions like Lilia, and in general, every AP champion. So the best early game holders for Collector will be AD backline units like Sivir, Senna, Caitlyn, and Aphelios. However, don't be afraid to put the Collector on units that you can guarantee kills with. The most important part about the Collector is if you take it early game, you really want to be making sure that your units that hold this can actually get kills. This means that you'll either have them upgraded or have them paired with like items that you get from extra components or an item anvil that you have lying around somewhere. So if you have like, for example, a saver with Infinity Edge, GS, or like any other AD item plus collector, it's gonna be a lot more valuable because that unit is gonna be stronger and you're basically giving yourself more chances to secure kills and get gold, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily put this on an AD champion early game, because if your strongest unit is something like Zyra or Kindred upgraded, have decent items around them, you can farm gold easily. Even though they won't like the AD as much, the value from this artifact will definitely come from the early game economy that you can get from the 40% chance of 1 gold from execute. So make sure you do your best to put this on a strong, either upgraded unit, a unit with items, or even both. So now let's talk about the mid to late game holders. I think the most popular right now will be Ashe, solely because she's the 4 cost. Alright, so now let's talk about the mid to late game holders. Right now, I think the most popular will be Ashe, solely because she got indirect buffs through 4 Sniper and 4 Warden, which makes her way more popular than Kai'Sa. I think that if you sort by putting Collector on her, you can see it's pretty good, but if you actually put the item in the stats, you can see that the item will be slightly better, maybe on Aphelios, even set. The reason being, the artifact does have decent stats with AD and attack speed, but most of the value and balance from this obviously is going to be from the gold gen. If you have a fully built Ashe that's near Abyss, like Winsu's, you already have a Last Whisper, GS, Gunblade, whatever, and you can move this to another unit, it's going to be a bit better. But if you have to complete a last item on Ashe, and that happens to be Collector, it's still good on her, don't get me wrong. And obviously with Ashe, you want to build Gunsu's Rageblade on her, please build it. It's like so much worse without it. Yeah. Then next for a really good holder is Kai'Sa. Now, obviously Kai'Sa did get indirectly nerfed through the nerf of her frontline and the 4 trickshot trait. However, Collector is still a really good item on her. She's one of the best units that can actually proc this and farm it because of the trickshot trait that actually spreads her waves and ultimate to the other team. Basically, whenever she ults and procs her waves that spread to the enemy team through trickshot, it can actually proc Collector and execute a lot of low health units. So I highly recommend this combination, especially when you play it in the 4 trickshot variant. It's also pretty good in Xayah, but in general, Collector is really good because Kai'Sa's ultimate is devastating. She can proc executes well, and also it's a pretty smooth transition from something like a story restart with Sivir, or even like a random fortune cash out and you just happen to have a Collector lying around. You can put it on Kai'Sa and play for that. Irelia is also pretty good. Now, I don't think it's like the best artifact on her, but Irelia will just twirl all her blades around the screen and execute low health units, so it can definitely be good. And with Duelist being probably the #1 comp in the meta right now that's not stored champion with Garen, it's gonna be a really solid option. I don't think any of the other Duelists also use this pretty well, with the meta in Duelist being going fast 8 to roll for your Lee Sin 2 and maybe hit an Irelia, then go 9 instead of rolling for Tristana 3 and Volley 3. So it's definitely a solid option to put in here. And obviously, I'll put Aphelios here because he's a sniper and it's the same principle as Ashe. Maybe you can even have him as a duo carry and it's going to work pretty well because he does a lot of damage, especially when 3-starred. Now for the worst holders, it's pretty simple. Like, I don't think Morgana and Lilia will like it because they're AP units and this artifact gives pure AD. Now, I did say earlier that most of the value of this artifact is giving you the early game gold so that you can leverage an early economy lead and actually use all of the gold you have to out-hit your contesters and build a better board. So if you manage to pivot into like one of these comps from a Collector start, then sure, maybe you can put it on them or any other unit, but just know it isn't the best on them. Same concept with Lee Sin. Like, all the melee units in general won't like this as much because it doesn't give something like Omnivamp, tankiness, or stats that melee units love. But if you have Collector early, maybe you have to put it on a Lee Sin or a melee unit or an adjacent unit in those comps. That's just the nature of gold generation artifacts though, and there's a reason why Gold Collector is still so strong. So for the next artifact we have in the good tier, we have Horizon Focus. I classified this as AP, but its really good user is a tank. So let me explain that in a bit. Horizon Focus currently averages a 4.31, and if you look at its most played holders, you'll know why. It's built a lot on Nautilus, 4.3 games, and then the next is Lux with 698. Why? Horizon Focus gives your units 15 mana, 20 armor, 20 MR, and 250 health. That means it's actually a solid artifact to put on frontliners and backliners, as it has pretty tanky stats overall. Knowing this, the artifact's effect is pretty niche. Whenever a unit stuns an enemy, Lightning will strike, which deals 30% of their max health as magic damage. 30% max health is a lot. Reading this means that this artifact is only good on units that will stun the enemy team. Basically, if a unit can't do a stun, or isn't supplemented with an item or something else that gives them a stun is useless on them. So all the units that can stun in this set are the following: Jax, Rek'Sai, Lux, Volibear, Nautilus, Annie, Set, Lissandra. And Wukong can also stun, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's just these units that can stun. And if you ask me, which of these holders are actually good, there's only one of them, and his name is Nautilus. Right now it's a Nautilus artifact. Only reason why is that Nautilus is the only users out of all of these that have a multi-target CC stun. Like when he ults, he can definitely hit a... And if you also notice, aside from Rek'Sai and Lux, they're really the only ones that like hit multiple units. So I don't think it's good on like these ones. Jax maybe early game with his ultimate and like a bit of splash stun, but I don't think it's that good. Rek'Sai for sure is the best early game holder of this artifact. She's a beast. She's really tanky, and 250 health and all these stats are actually pretty decent. You like sometimes can solo frontliner. Sometimes you can even solo frontline Rek'Sai early game with a tank item, and she'll just ult and just do 30% damage, like nuking the enemy frontline. So you can definitely do that. Late game though, you're probably gonna play Nautilus, and Nautilus is played in for Warden or for Sniper comp, or he's also played in the... So he's also played with Lilia. So yeah, basically this is a Nautilus item. There's not much to it. It's okay on Lux. Lux reroll isn't that good right now, but if you have a random Lux 2 in your comp, you're playing like Vertical Arcanist. Like maybe you have a Lissandra and you want to pair it with Lux, sure. It's decent, but right now it's just a Nautilus item. There are a few interactions that enable units to stun. For example, SILVERMERE Dawn plus Horizon Focus can be pretty funny. I tried it in a Chong's Treasure game with my Gnar, where I had SILVERMERE Dawn, Horizon Focus, and it was pretty cool. Tattoo of Force and Eternal Winter Stun as well. What's cool is if you have Horizon Focus and put it on a unit that can't inherently stun, but you pair it with one of these, it will allow them to actually deal magic damage with Horizon Focus's ability. However, I don't think any of these are that good. Maybe Eternal Winter is really good, where if units are stunned by Winter, they'll actually have Lightning strike them, so it'll do a lot of damage. Yeah, for the most part, that's really it. It's just a Nautilus item. Sometimes you can put a Lux. Rek'Sai, she's the best early game holder. So that's pretty much it for Horizon Focus. Pretty simple artifact. So for our next artifact in the gray tier, we have Fishbones, which is currently an attack speed item that got buffed in patch 14.10. And you can see over here, it averages a 4.49. But the reason why I have it in good and not something like okay or niche is because it's absolutely broken in Ash, and it actually can work on a few other units pretty decently. Let me explain. So Fishbones gives 35% AD and 35 attack speed to your unit that has it. It got buffed. It used to be 30% before patch 14.10. So that's why its average placement increased. And it basically doubles the holder's attack range, which is important for the next part. And it causes each of their attacks to target a random enemy. So this artifact is really funny, and honestly can be either one of the best artifacts in the game or one of the worst, depending on how your unit targets, right? So as I said here, it's a fun artifact that randomizes the attacks of holders. And it's important to note that there is a dream interaction that people have thought of, where you have the item Tattoo of Force, which is an Ink Shadow tattoo that basically stuns an enemy whenever the holder of that tattoo acquires a new target. But it just doesn't work, because how I described how Fishbones work is that Fishbones doesn't change a unit's target. It just makes each of the autos or abilities choose a random target. So my really Mickey Mouse example is if you have a bow and arrow and you're looking at an apple, but someone else is remote controlling the arrow, your target will still be the apple, right? It's not like every time you auto attack a new unit, it considers itself changing the target. The actual projectile or the auto attack is the thing getting changed. So unlucky, the interaction doesn't work. So for Fishbones early game, I mean, I don't think it has particularly good holders. I think the AD units will like it best because they like attack speed and the AD it provides. So for example, Sivir, Aphelios, and Caitlyn will work. Caitlyn's pretty funny because she closes her eyes and chooses a random target to ult. So maybe the stars align and she'll just snipe a random backline unit. But just know what you come to expect with this artifact early game. Like, your targeting won't be consistent at all. Let's say you're facing this like pretty ghostly ZZ'ROT board. That's pretty meta right now. You are not gonna be able to know where your units are hitting. Sometimes it can like snipe the most random backline. Sometimes it won't. So hopefully your units are smart enough to be able to target the right thing and you can ride this late game. So mid to late game, I think that the best holder is actually Ashe. Now, the reason being, it provides the perfect amount of attack speed and AD, which Ashe really likes. And if Ashe targets the backline with Fishbones, she can straight up one-shot a unit due to her sniper trait. Like, the best build with Fishbones is probably something like Winston's Rage Blade plus Infinity Edge plus this to make sure that Ash can crit and do massive damage if she decides to target the backline. You can actually see here that in a 4 sniper setup, Ash will really like Fishbones. I think it's also pretty solid on Aphelios, so if you're duo carrying him or playing him in a vertical faded setup, I would definitely try to put it on him. Now Tristana is actually a banger if you put Fishbones on her. Basically with her ultimate, right? She jumps on her target, but because her target is random, she has the chance of jumping at a random backliner on the enemy team. For example, if they have a Yasuo in the front line, Sivir in the back line, Tristana randomly targets this. She'll jump here and she has the chance to nuke it, especially once she's 3 stars. So I'm going to put up a really quick video that showcases this interaction, but I definitely recommend you to try it because it's really, really fun. And although Tristana 3 isn't that popular right now, it's definitely something you can try. Xayah also has really good stats for Fishbones for some reason. I don't really know why, but I guess her ultimate can be really devastating if redirected, and it's all in one burst anyways when she pulls her feathers. So maybe give it a shot. I'm pretty sure it's decent. So it's mainly gonna be an Ashe Aphelios item with some niche use cases in Tristana and Xayah. So for the worst users of Fishbones, you basically want to think about which units you really want to be hitting the same thing. Like you look at a unit and you're like, oh, I wish my Kai'Sa would hit the same target or focus fire. Kai'Sa is such a grief because her waves really want to be attacking the same target. Because in her ability, if an enemy is hit by 10 waves, they take more damage. And this randomizes the target for each individual wave, I believe. So if you put Fishbones on Kai'Sa, she's not going to focus fire and she's going to attack all over the place. Same with Morgana. Bro, I'm pretty sure Morgana already has random targeting. So putting Fishbones on her is redundant. Now, something like Lissandra can be really funny because if you have a list like second row, doubles your attack range, she actually has the chance to snipe a backline unit, even though Lissandra is heavily nerfed. Putting Fishbones on her can be funny, and you can definitely troll like the enemy team by like sniping someone in their backline. So maybe try that. I just think that this artifact is really fun in general. It's extremely strong in Ashe and Aphelios sniper setups, but just put it on units just to see how funny they are if they attack a random target. Like if you put Fishbones like Irelia or Wukong, like just you have to see it for yourself to see. It's really fun. So highly recommend trying this artifact out. If you want the best use case though, just put it on the snipers. Alright, so the next artifact we have is Infinity Force. Now, Infinity Force averages at 4.28, and it's one of the most flexible artifacts of the patch. And in general, this is because Infinity Force, the only thing it really gives you is all the stats in the game, except for crit. Gives you 25% AD, attack speed, AP, mana, armor, MR, and health. So it's pretty good. It's just generally a really solid artifact that's best with melee carries, because melee carries can effectively use all the stats. They can use mana, armor, and MR, as well as the health. Because backline carries will enjoy some of the mixed hybrid damage stats, but they won't really utilize the resistances and the tank stats as much. So for the best holders, we have stuff like Kayn, Lee Sin, and Wukong. The worst holders, we have Bard and Pure Tanks. You can get this artifact from the Augments Freaky Friday or Freaky Friday Plus. This one, Freaky Friday, gives you an Infinity Force, and then after 5 combats, it gives you another one. Then Freaky Friday Plus is the same thing, but makes it 3 player combats. This is because Freaky Friday is supposed to be given at 2-1. And Freaky Friday Plus should only appear at 3-2 and onwards. So it's basically the same thing, just a slight delay in when they give the artifact. Now, since this augment gives 2 Infinity Forces, conceptually, it would make sense to play this in a comp with a lot of duo carries. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But first, let's go over the early game holders. I think that if you get this from Freaky Friday or just anywhere in general, just put it on any upgraded carry you have. Ideally, you have it on a frontliner melee carry, but I think everything will work because it's just really supposed to boost the stats of your unit. The 250 health and 25 everything will really help out when you carry the units. So stuff like Ahri, Caitlyn, Teemo, and Senna for the backline will definitely work. And then obviously for the melee carries, Kha'Zix, Kiana, Nar, Volibear, and anyone you can think of. So ideally you want to have this for comps with duo carries. If you get it from Freaky Friday, that's just because you're going to have 2 Infinity Forces, right? So an example of some meta comps would be Duelist setup is the most popular and in my opinion the most effective. A lot of the units such as Volley, Triss, Lee Sin, ideally Irelia and Wukong can hold Infinity Force. A few other examples of comps are, for example, even Faded Dried Syndra. You can have multiple duo carries with Infinity Force. Stuff like Heavenly Kayn with Kayn, Lee Sin, Wukong, and Morgana. And basically any comp with a duo carry will utilize it. Also important to note that you don't necessarily have to split the Infinity Force if you get this from Freaky Friday. Feel free to like put 2 on a unit if it boosts the stats and you can't complete their 3rd item. Because if you get it early, you can definitely stack it and then sell them because you're going to use a unit as an item holder. For mid to late game holders, it's just really going to be the melee carries that like it the best. Kayn and Lee Sin are the primary ones. Lee Sin will use it pretty well because he's played in the 6th duelist comp and he's one of the meta units right now. But basically any melee carry should work. Gnar, Qiyana, Lee Sin, Volley, Kayn, and Wukong. So don't be too picky about this. I don't think it's specifically horrible on anyone. It has slightly less value on backliners such as Ashe, Kai'Sa, for example. But don't be afraid to put it if you have to. And in general, it's just a really good flexible artifact. So that's why I rate it in the good tier. Alright, so next we have ANIMA VISAGE, which is a really good and flexible tank artifact. You can see over here that it currently averages a 4.36, and it's just pretty flexible artifact that you pretty much put on any tank. You can see over here that it gives you 25 MR and 450 health, and it heals your unit 2.5% max health every second. So it's a pretty simple artifact. The best holders will be most tanks. You just really want to be putting this on any tank you have. There's not really like bad holders. Like if I were to nitpick, it's like not as good in Sylas because he already has healing, but it's still pretty good. Early game, you just want to be putting this on your primary tank. I think that the bruisers will work slightly better because they scale with max HP, and then ANIMA VISAGE heals from max health. But any tank will do, honestly, and don't be hard pressed to put this on a specific unit. Your tankiest unit should protect you, and ANIMA VISAGE will do a good job of that. Mid to late game, just put it on your tankiest units. If I were to nitpick something, it would be that tanks that don't have inherent healing in their kit will benefit from this slightly more because they're balanced around the fact that they don't have healing. So Nautilus is balanced around his CC, Galio is balanced around his tank, being a bruiser, and his resistances, and Ornn is balanced around the fact that he can give items as well as have a massive shield. So Annie and Sylas do have healing in their kits, so it's going to be slightly worse on them. But if they're your primary tank, don't worry, just slap it on them. This artifact will never be bad for your team if you're putting it on a tank. You can just see right here, right? Like Galio, Nautilus, and Ornn are the top most built because they are the most popular, but the relative delta says that it's super good in them. And while it's still great on Annie, like the deltas are slightly more positive. In general though, ANIMA VISAGE is just super simple. Put it on any tank you have. For the next artifact we have in good, we have HULLCRUSHER, which is also a tank artifact. HULLCRUSHER averages a 4.37 in Masters Plus, and it's just a really solid tank artifact. I think it's better early game because it grants 600 health to the unit that's holding it, only if they have no adjacent allies. So 600 health is massive early game, so I think if you pick it early, it's going to be better in general than if you pick it late game. And it doesn't grieve your positioning as much. It also grants 35 armor and MR, as well as 30% attack speed. Those best holders will be most tanks and Udyr, because Udyr will actually utilize the attack speed, and usually you want to isolate him from a team or put him in the corners. And for the worst holders, it's just the same thing. It's like non-tank units. Put this on your tanks. And Sylas doesn't like it as much, but it's still okay on him. It's also important to note that you can get 3 HULLCRUSHERs from the augment Call to Chaos with a 1 in 10 chance. It's just if you pick Call to Chaos and hit the 1 in 10, you're going to get it. And then for their early game, it's just the same concept. I put him in an Exile's positioning because you really want to be activating this effect early game. You have TK, you have units like Tahm, Shen, Yasuo, any early game tank should do. Just make sure your tank's isolated so it actually gains the 600 HP bonus. Then for mid to late game, it's just good on most tanks. Like, it's a bit more precarious mid to late game because sometimes you can grief your positioning by soloing your tank and they'll get focused or they're in the wrong spot. But for the most part, it should be fine. I did cover that in my guide. Galio won't like it as much because generally you want to position Galio in the middle. And then since Galio taunts, if you have HULLCRUSHER active and if he's in the middle, you won't have a unit on the left or right. So it can make positioning a bit awkward, but it's not really a big deal. Also pointed out that Sylas won't like this as much because, as I said earlier, Sylas really likes AP and resistances, and while he won't hate the HP, I think there's better options on him. Obviously, if you're primary tanking Sylas, put it on him, but if he's a secondary, it's probably not the best on him. You can see here that Nautilus really loves the item. Galio is slightly positive, but it's not bad. Annie likes it. Ornn is okay with it. Then Sylas is a plus 0.11 delta. So it's just a really solid tank artifact in general. And I think that's a lot better early game because it won't grief your positioning as hard. So for our next artifact in the good tier, we have Death's Dance, also known as Death's Defiance formally. I like calling it DD as well. You can see that it averages 4.35 in Masters Plus. The main reason why it's pretty good right now is because duelists are probably the top comp in the game, and Lee Sin uses it really well. This is a melee artifact that gives 10% AD, 25% AS, and 30 armor. But the most important part is that it grants 25% Omnivamp, but it also does the following. 50% of the damage the holder receives is instead dealt over 4 seconds as non-lethal damage. Now, before I go over the holders, I'll talk about how that actually works. Basically, a unit with DD, 50% of the damage that it will take will be normal damage, so it'll be dealt instantly. But the other 50% will be dealt over time as non-lethal damage. Now, what does non-lethal damage mean in this case? It means that it's applied as a DOT, meaning that it's gonna tick over a duration of 4 seconds. It's a bit confusing, but basically, as an example, if a unit has 1000 HP and it will take 12,000 damage from an ability, 600 damage will be dealt immediately, but the other 50% will be dealt over 4 seconds as non-lethal damage. So this is why sometimes units with DD can seem super tanky and near immortal, because they'll mitigate half the damage and then over time they can actually heal with the Omnivamp and stack up more of that non-lethal damage mitigation. Here we can also see that Mordog explains how DD's damage calculation will work with resistances. Basically, the stagger damage from DD applies post resistance calculation. You can just see it in this clip. DD also has a good combo when you pair it with Edge of Night or the Radiant counterpart Brink of Dawn. This is basically because at 60% health, EON users briefly become untargetable and shed negative effects, and DD's non-lethal damage calculation counts as a negative effect. So it basically sheds the extra damage that is calculated if Edge of Night is procced along with DD. So it's a pretty good combo. You can actually go to my artifact doc and see this interaction in one of Goody's videos, who does a bunch of good TFT videos, so check them out. And just in general, it's just a really good habit to build anti-heal from sources like Sunfire and Morello, so highly recommend doing that. And I'll just talk about the holders real quick. It's going to be all the melee units. Any unit that uses a Bloodthirster well, just think about any unit that uses a Bloodthirster well will just like DD in general, because it's basically a very similar artifact that has the damage mitigation part. So Lee Sin, Wukong, Kayn, and Shen. Shen with Ethereal Blades is really good with Death's Defiance, just because it acts as a healing item. So if you have like Death's Defiance plus 2 Guinsoo's, worst holders will be Sylas and Volibear. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So for early game holders, you can really put this on anyone, such as Kha'Zix, Aatrox, Yone. There's any melee bruisers who will enjoy this, who like healing. The Duelist should also work well. Darius and Kiana are prime examples. Then mid to late game, it's just going to be really good on the melee units such as Kayn, Lee Sin, Set, and Wukong if you get there. It's particularly good on Lee Sin right now because he's really meta, but it's still going to be a good item on him, especially paired with Edge of Night. For the bad holders, as I explained countless times, Sylas really likes AP and resistances. He already has healing as a part of his kit, so he won't like DD. And for Volibear specifically, Volibear 3 isn't rerolled as much right now, but DD's not good because generally he likes AP tank items like Crown Guard and maybe the combo BT Titans, although that's not as good. So just leftover tank items. I think if you're playing Duelist, you should most likely be putting it on a Lee Sin instead of a Volibear. And then here I'm just confirming that for Shen's Ethereal Blades, DD's a really good artifact. It's his best one because he scales so well of armor, and he also likes healing, so you replace it with building BT or Gunblade on him. And over here, I'm just gonna confirm the stats with you guys. So DD is really good on Lee Sin, Set, all the melee units, Wukong, and Kayn. It has good deltas. It's, like I said earlier, it's bad on Sylas because he just wants AP, like Crown Guard, Spark, and all that stuff. It's also good on reroll lines like Gnar and Kiana. Basically, any unit that likes Bloodthirster will like this item for the most part. Also, it's not as good on Udyr. Like, I think this tool is super useful, where if you go to the items tab in tactics.tools and you expand the Ornn artifacts, it actually gives a more accurate picture than looking at the Explorer themselves, because the relative delta will usually give a better picture of all the items. Yeah, but that's it for DD. You just want to be putting them on your melee units. There's a few nuances, but for the most part, it's just a solid artifact that's really good when the melee comps are meta. For our last artifact in the good tier, we have Suspicious Trenchcoat. Now, you can notice that this is on a downtrend. However, don't get me wrong, it's still really good in certain units. You can see over here that it averages a 4.42, and you can already see some of its best holders that I'm going to talk about in a bit. Suspicious Trenchcoat gives your units 25% attack speed and 250 health. The most important part is that once per combat, when a unit reaches 50% health, the holder splits into 3 copies of themselves, each with 33% of their max health. It's going to spawn 3 clones when the unit hits the health threshold. This is going to be really impactful on units that have a lot of disruption or have really good abilities that they can cast even when they're cloned. So the best holders of this artifact by far will be Sylas. I know a lot of the artifacts above are pretty bad on Sylas, but this one makes him into an absolute monster. I highly recommend putting it on him. You also have Udyr, who's really good with it. The tanks Ornn and Galio are solid with it. And Lissandra got nerfed, so she isn't as good with it. But having 3 Lissandras on the board can still be really disruptive versus comps like Duelist or any melee comps. For the worst holders specifically, I'm going to talk about why it's really bad in Nautilus and Annie for the tanks. And obviously you don't want to be putting this on backline units, because usually backline units want to be the last ones alive, so it won't really proc at a good time. And in my artifact doc, I talked about so many different interactions that Suspicious Trenchcoat has with different items. Because you can put Trenchcoat with other artifacts and support items, it can lead to some nutty combinations on certain units or items. For example, Trenchcoat plus Horizon Focus plus 2 of Force. Trenchcoat will proc combat of start effects such as Crown Guard and Vow. Just make sure to check out my artifact guide. I think one of the most notable ones I covered earlier is Trenchcoat plus Diamond Hands. If you somehow get your hands on both of the artifacts early game, you get 4 gold around because the clones will all proc it. So make sure you check that out over here. Then let's go to the early game holders. For the most part, Trenchcoat is really good early game because it gives you a lot of effective HP. Bruisers should work particularly well with this because the clones should scale off max HP. I know there are a few bugs last patch regarding HP scaling of clones, whether it be from the Bruiser trait or overall star levels, so hopefully that's fixed. However, you really want to be putting Trenchcoat on just on most frontline units, such as Yasuo, Garen, Illaoi, Tahm Kench. Makes your team a lot tankier, and just think that the unit's ult is good and they can cast after Trenchcoat, then it's going to be pretty solid. Like, duelists can use them decently as well, because they do damage. So, it works on a lot of frontline units early game. Alright, so now let's talk about the mid to late game holders. I'm going to talk about each one briefly. So, Sylas is probably one of the best holders for this artifact, and just one of the best combos in the game in general. He does a lot of disruption, damage, and is pretty tanky. So if you pair Sylas with Trenchcoat along with his really good tank items such as Adaptive Helm, Crown Guard, and Spark, he's gonna do so much damage. When he splits, Sylas has an ability where he can sometimes dash onto the enemy backline or dash in general. So there are instances when your Sylas dies and then the Trenchcoat will actually blow up in the middle of the enemy board. So the Sylases will do so much damage to the backline. I have a clip in my artifact guide somewhere, but it's gonna be a really good combination in general. Next, for the two tanks that use this well, for the forecast, we have Ornn and Galio. Ornn clones can actually spawn items if they cast with the artifact, so it can be a pretty good combination. I know Ornn got nerfed with his mana, so the casts aren't guaranteed, but it's still a pretty good artifact to put on him and gives your team a lot of tankiness. Same with Galio. Galio's clones can actually taunt, and they can be pretty tanky with the added MR and armor. So if you have solid tank items on Galio, it's gonna obviously copy all of the items along with Trenchcoat, and then his clones will be able to taunt and just tank a lot of damage. For the legendaries, Udyr in particular is really good with Trenchcoat. Udyr is usually positioned in the corners or the top of your team so that he can pierce the enemy backline and potentially cause a lot of disruption. If Udyr is near the backline and he splits after he's targeted and dies, he's gonna do so much damage and wreak so much havoc in the other team that it's just a great artifact on him. The Sandra got nerfed in 14.10 with the Porcelain trait and the removal of her ability where she throws units into the other team. But it's still pretty good on her because having 3 Lissandras versus like weak frontlines or a lot of melee carries is going to be really good. And then we also have Rakan, who honestly isn't the best user of this artifact, but his clones can be pretty tanky because they all gain shield for each enemy they hit, and they also do damage reduction to the other team. So it's just units with these impactful disruption or ultimates that are really good. Now let's talk about the bad holders for Suspicious Trenchcoat. Only 2 really come to mind, Nautilus and Annie. And the reason being, Nautilus clones will most likely not cast if he dies, because Nautilus wants tankiness, right? Because you want him to cast like twice in a fight ideally, but most of the time he'll only cast 1 time. So his clones will actually usually not cast because his mana threshold is so high. So it isn't that much value on him. Now obviously there's a fantasy of like 3 not clones CCing the other team, but usually they die really quickly, so it's not that good on him. Same thing with Annie. Annie clones just don't really do anything. Like, they just have HP. It's like a stat stick, so it's a pretty bad artifact on her. I wouldn't recommend it. And we can go into stats over here to see that pretty good in Ornn. It's really bad in Nautilus. It's really ridiculous on Sylas. Minus 0.61 delta is insane. So look to build Trenchcoat on Sylas if you can. It's like not bad on Set, but it's good on Udyr. Pretty bad on Illaoi because Illaoi clones really won't do anything. Good on Galio, and basically all the stuff I talked about. See, it's also terrible with Annie. So that's basically it for Trenchcoat. This item has so many interactions that I recommend reading all of them in my guide that you can visit in the description. It's a good artifact that has a lot of utility and HP, and with the right holders, it's probably one of the best in the game still. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the artifacts in the OK tier. These won't be as solid as the ones in good. They are usually more niche or less consistent, but with the right units and items, they can definitely shine. First, I'm going to talk about the AP artifact DEATHFIRE Grass, also commonly known as DFG in the community. Then we can see over here that DFG averages a 4.4, so it's pretty solid, but honestly it's one of the more unpopular artifacts like SILVERMERE Dawn and Unending Despair with a 0.06 pick rate. You start it all the way by pick rate, it's like pretty near the bottom, and I'm going to explain why in a bit. But DFG gives your units 50 AP and 15 mana, But most important is its combat start ability, where it blasts the current target for 20% of their max health as magic damage. Now, this is a pretty good amount, but it also gives 25% more damage to the unit that holds it for the next 10 seconds. And then damage dealt to the blasted target will be increased to 35%. Now, this reads like a tank killer, and honestly, it's a pretty solid AP artifact on a bunch of AP units. The best holders will be the Invokers, Lilia and Hui, Alun 3, and sorry, this should be Zoe. Alun 3 and Zoe 3 will also use it well, and stuff like maybe a Zyra 3. And then the worst holders will just be Syndra and Morgana. And then I have a thinking emoji next to Silas because it's really not that popular of an item on him, but it has some sleeper decent stats, so I'm gonna put him here for now. And with DFG, it's just an okay artifact in general. There's nothing super special about it. Early game, if you have it, just put it on any AP units that probably like dealing burst damage, like Kindred, Zoe, Ari. Ari is pretty good with it. And then we can move on to the mid to late game holders. The best ones by far will be the Invokers. Lilia is going to be a really good dispatch, played in Vertical Mythic, Sage Lilia, or sometimes Invoker Lilia. It's pretty good in her just because she can do a lot of burst damage, so she can actually utilize the ability from DFG pretty well. Same with Azir. He does a lot of burst because his Sand Soldier ultimate does so much damage. It's also pretty good timing in conjunction with his ultimate and the 10-second damage boost window. Wei will really like this because he can hit the whole board with his ability, so the damage amp will be pretty massive, and he also does a good amount of damage. Same concept with the reroll users, Alun, Zoe, and Zyra. If you 3-star them, DFG is going to be good because they do a lot of burst, and in general, these units are on the higher damage end of the AP, and they do a lot of their damage upfront. Specifically, Zoe, with her ricochets, she can definitely farm a lot of damage, and you want her to stack kills so that she can get more ricochets for her ability to decimate the enemy team. Then over here, I just quickly checked that Silas has like very low okay stats with DFG. It's actually surprisingly good, specifically in the 4 Bruiser variant. But like, even if you remove this is probably played in like what, Umbral Silas or maybe even Sage Silas. It's not bad on him. If we go like Emerald, we can see more people build it, and it's like an okay artifact. It kind of makes sense because Silas really likes AP and does all the burst damage, but I would try it out. So yeah, I would probably put Silas as a decent holder of DFG. Like, it's not the best, but it's definitely something to watch out for. All right, so now let's move on to the worst holders of DFG. First, we have Morgana. I explained this in my document, but it's not good in her because her damage output isn't really bursty, and she doesn't do that much consistent damage. As I said earlier, she really likes stuff like utility, blue buff, mana generation, like items like Morello and Shaver pretty good on her. And then she doesn't do the most damage, so it won't be the best on her. Her damage is also pretty random. So when she blasts the target with DFG, she can sometimes throw her ultimate to the backline and never actually hit the frontliner if you get unlucky. So it's just not a good artifact on her. Next, let's talk about Syndra. It's not going to be the best artifact on her because conceptually, she's a scaling mage, right? She does a lot of her damage towards later in the fight because she'll have stacked all her butterflies. And DFG really wants all of the damage to be upfront. In the first 10 seconds, the damage amp is the most. While it's not the worst artifact on Syndra, it's definitely not something I'd consider particularly good. It's basically a worse Rabadon's with the AP and a little bit of like damage amplification, which isn't bad. Also for Syndra, like usually if you have units in the front, like if you have tank units, you want to blast the really tanky units first, like the super tanks. And there's not going to be a lot of people that will have super tanks in the corners, right? Because with Syndra positioning, you'll usually put her in the corner because you want her to be last alive. And although you can middle Syndra, usually the like super beefy tanks like the Orns and like maybe the Nautiluses that you want to burst down with DFG will be in the middle, right? So if you corner Syndra, it won't be as good. Also, if there's like something like an Udyr here, Syndra will blast this and GG. Whereas something like Morgana and Lilia, you can actually move around like maybe to the middle to blast a specific super tank in that niche case. So yeah, it's definitely not the best artifact on Syndra, and I'd probably avoid building it on her unless you have to. Over here, I just want to confirm all the data. Lilia, it's going to be good on Lilia, Azir, Alun, Zoe, Hui, exactly like I talked about. It's terrible on Lissandra, by the way, because this unit does not do damage anymore, I swear, because they nerfed like the damage part of her kit where she throws all of the enemy units, where she throws her target into an enemy clump. So don't build it on Liss. But it's good on these units. It's not that good on Morg, and it's pretty bad on Syndra. So that's really it for DFG. Pretty unpopular, but does have some pretty okay cases on a few of the high damage AP units. And then next on the okay tier, we have Innervating Locket, which is also a tank artifact. You can see over here that it averages a 4.47. It's like pretty solid in general. Innervating Locket gives your units 15 mana and 150 health, and the holder gains 2% of their total mana whenever they're hit, and each cast restores 20% of the holder's max health over 3 seconds. So this artifact kind of has a cyclic effect where it's going to give your units mana whenever they're hit, and then every time they cast, they gain health. So the more they get hit, the more they gain health, and it's going to be a cycle that can be pretty decent on some tanks. The best holders in general will be Nautilus, because he's really tanky right now. Ornn actually used to be a really good Ornn artifact until he got nerfed, so his mana threshold is a lot higher, so it's not as good. Then this is also good on various hero augments like Garen's Story Champion, where it's absolutely broken on him, and Koboko's Lucky Paws. In general, Innervating Locket, it's really good. The worst holders, I would say, are obviously non-tanks, and tanks that already have inbuilt healing, such as Annie, Silas, and Amumu. But in general, just pretty flexible. It's an okay tank item. It's like not the best, but not the worst. Early game, you just really want to put it on any tank. Late game, it's good on Ornn and Nautilus and the hero augments, and you can see in the stats yourself, it's really good. Not okay on Ornn, not as good on Annie and Silas, but still fine. Amumu and Ilaoi, it's not as good as, because they're hard at 3-star, and they already have a bunch of inbuilt healing from their kits. It's like Oki and Galio, it's pretty good on Tonkench, and yeah, just a solid tank artifact. Then you go all the way down, you can see that Koboko and Garen are here. The reason why their stats are so high with this is because they become really good with the artifact when played with their hero augments. So look to take Innervating Locket when you have Lucky Paws or Story Champion. That's really it. It's a flexible, decent tank artifact, nothing else. Alright, so next in the okay tier, we have the tank artifact LIGHTSHIELD CREST. Now, it's also averaging a 4.5 straight in the middle. I think Riot did a pretty good job of balancing these tank artifacts. It's not that special in particular. Every 3 seconds, it shields the lowest percent health ally for 50% of the holders combined MR and armor. It's like pretty good shielding. It also gives 50 armor and MR, so it is a pure resistance artifact that is pretty solid on honestly most tanks. Like Amumu likes it the best in the stats for some reason, but like Galio, Ornn, Nautilus, Silas, they'll all work. I just put some extra stuff here about pairing it with stuff like Redemption or stuff with a different stat bucket, but in general, it's just a good artifact. Like, yeah, the delta might be a bit high, but in general, you're just putting this on your tankiest unit, because obviously there's a lot more value if your tank is alive, because it will continually shield. If your tank dies early in the fight, then this won't have that much value because it can't shield your team. So just try to make sure that you have a bunch of different good tanky items surrounding your LIGHTSHIELD crest holder. Early game, just really anyone. Like, it's important to note there are a few like sources of extra armor and more. Like the Behemoth trait gives units like Shen and Thresh and Malphite more armor and MR once other behemoths die or start a combat. It can also be obtained from something like the Ultras trait, which gives 10 MR and armor to your whole team at 2. Or something like Heavenly, where if you activate Heavenly with a Malphite, your team gets armor and MR. But honestly, the thing is, the numbers are like so small. Like 50% of armor and MR like isn't like that much. And then sources like Last Whisper and Shred will exist late game. So you can't really like find like a 6 Behemoth LIGHTSHIELD crest super carry, I think. So in general, it's just a solid tank artifact. Galio, Ornn, Nautilus, any Rakan late game tankiest unit. Like you can see here, all tanks will probably like it equally. Amumu is just a really tanky unit, especially with the 4 Warden buffs. That's why the delta's so high. Like, but in general, just put it on your tankiest unit. The reason why this is a probably high delta on Yorick is because people put it on his hero augment. I don't think it's that good. But yeah, in general, it's an okay tank artifact, very flexible. Pick it if you need more frontline, and that's it. So for our next artifact, we have Trickster's Class. Now you can see over here that it averages a 4.8, but it's a little bit on the unpopular end as it has a 0.08 play rate. It's important to note that you can get 2 Trickster's Class as part of a temporary encounter with Zoe, where she grants users, I think, 2 Trickster's Class for 3 rounds. So that can be a source of getting this. Trickster Glass gives your units 10% attack speed, 10 armor, MR, and 15% crit. And the important part about this artifact is that it summons a clone with 70% max health and 30% max mana. It does summon a clone of whatever unit you have to put it on. However, make sure you have Trickster's Glass equipped before the round starts, because if you have it after, or if you slam Tricksters after the round starts, then you won't be able to get the clone. And it's important to note that this clone will have more mana. So if you put Tricksters on a high mana unit such as Nautilus, Lissandra, Ornn, stuff like that, then maybe it's going to be a bit hard for the clone to actually cast and do their ultimate, because they do have less health, which makes them squishier and more mana. There's one in particular that's really good, and that's Irelia. And since Irelia is a lot more popular now due to the Fast 8 Duels comp being more meta, then it's going to be a great artifact to put on her. It's also decent on units like Nautilus and Udyr, but aside from these three, I wouldn't really put it on anyone else. Now, some people use it as a frontline booster, but it is only a clone with 70% max health. And Galio, Silas, and Annie are some holders that actually really don't like this artifact. And well, honestly, early game, there's like not really any particular units that will like this particularly well. Just use it to boost your frontline. I think the duelist can use it a bit better than average because the clone does keep the stacks. So duelist clone with Trickster's class can actually do decent work. That's why it's so good in something like Irelia. These are actually the users that will use it well. I have two Nautiluses here, but I have Nautilus because he's super tanky right now, and you can put the clone like second row maybe, and then the clone has the potential to ult, even though it will take a while. If a clone manages to ult, then it's gonna be so much value. Udyr is also good to duplicate. He just causes a lot of disruption. Like Suspicious Trenchcoat is good with him, but this only gives one clone, and then the clone has 70% max health and more mana to cost. The clone has 70% max health and costs more mana overall to activate their ability. Udyr. And now Irelia, it is just one of her best artifacts. Like the Irelia clone really doesn't care about her ability. She'll be able to do a lot of damage as she keeps the duelist stacks, and you'll keep her backline. So the downsides of less health and more maximum mana doesn't really matter. I'd look to put it on her if possible. It's really, really, really good. Let's see over here. We can see play rate. People put it on Nautilus. It's not bad. So the clone can sometimes cast. It used to be decent on Ornn, but after the mana nerfs, which he's currently at, what, 120 mana? I think maybe 130. And they're nerfing him again next patch. It's going to be a lot worse because the clone will struggle to cast. And the impact of one CC ult from Nautilus is a lot more than a random item from Ornn. Because Ornn as an actual tank can live more in general. Because a normal Ornn can sometimes cast 2 or 3 times a fight. But sometimes if you have a fully itemized Nautilus, since his mana is so high, you can only cast once a fight. So if I were to choose one of the ultimates to activate in a fight, it would probably be Nautilus. And he's just pretty good right now because of the 4 Warden buffs. Then you can see Irelia is really good with Tricksters. Then if you go down the list, all of the deltas are pretty bad. Let's sort by the deltas. Now, it says it's good in Shen, which probably good in like Ghostly or maybe Ethereal Blades. I have to check. Now, for the delta, it just says it's really good on Irelia. Okay on Nautilus and Udyr. It's solid. And then it's good on Shen as well, which is interesting. But everyone else doesn't really like this artifact, so it is pretty unpopular and kind of niche, but I'll put it in okay because of how good it is on Irelia and the Nautilus. Alright, so next on the okay tier, we have Gambler's Blade, which is an attack speed and gold generation item. But this artifact is really important to note that it's only good at taken to 1. This is because it's a gold generation artifact, and you can clearly see it from the augment that grants this item. Lucky Streak, it grants a Gambler's Blade and a Magnetic Remover, which is also pretty important. 2-1, average of 4.5, it's okay. And 3-2, 4-2, it has terrible stats, so I would really avoid picking it. The reason why is because the artifact as a base isn't that powerful with stats. It only gives 40% attack speed and 10% AP. The important part is that it grants 1% bonus attack speed per gold in your bank, up to 30 gold. So it is a gold generation artifact. The reason why it's rated lower than something like, for example, Diamond Hands and the Collector is because it's a lot more, in my opinion, inconsistent, right? Because, for example, let's say your units have like a pretty high attack speed, it's still a 1% chance per gold. And while you can snowball with something like Gambler's Blade plus like Gwynsu's Ragely Start, it is very inconsistent. And then late game, this artifact really doesn't do anything. So basically you have to bank on it, farming you enough gold to justify being like down an artifact, right? So you can see over here, it's really good at 2-1. Make sure, as a small tip, whenever you have Gambler's Blade early game and you put it on like any early game AS unit or backline unit, you can buy units in your shop after the round ends so that you get that extra bit of attack speed, right? Because it grants bonus AS based on gold. So instead of buying out your shop like you should normally be doing if it doesn't cost you interest before the round starts, just do it after the round starts. And this artifact's pretty simple. I think right now it's just very mid. It's pretty inconsistent. Like, it's obviously best with a Gwynsu start. Maybe something like a Sivir 2 and a Story Reaver. But be careful slamming Gwynsus in general as well. Because there's a big chance that Ashe could be contested. Right now she's in the meta, and you really want to scout around to see if you can force Ashe with a Gwynsu slam. So although Gwynsus and Gambler's Blade is a historically great combo, you need to make sure to scout and see if Ashe is uncontested, right? Because the only lines you're really playing with a Gwynsu slam in this meta is Fast 8 Ashe, Bard reroll, a Fellows reroll maybe, or Fast 9 Irelia. And Ashe is the only consistent one, right? So early game, it really doesn't matter who you put this on. Just put it on any unit that is a backliner, and Ideally, you have like a bow item, but it's not like the most necessary. Important thing is keeping your gold up and hoping you can snowball that gold. The more gold you have, the more attack speed, which means a greater chance to grant you more gold. And it's kind of a cyclic effect, right? And a small note is it's actually okay on Bard, because if you're reloading Bard, his base is 2 Guinsus, and you can technically use this as one of their replacements because he attacks really fast. You can see it's actually good in Bard because you can farm a lot of gold if you already have Guinsus with Gamblers. And honestly, late game is like pretty poor on most carries, because if you have gold already in your bank to increase the attack speed, then you're probably already ahead of the game and in a position to push levels or win, right? So in the end, it's just an artifact that gives 40% AS, maybe a bit more for gold. Late game, you probably won't be having that much gold, right? Because you want to spend it to upgrade your board or push levels or stuff like that. So I would recommend like reforging this late game if you have the chance, or just putting it on like an off carry. It doesn't really matter. The most important thing with Gambler's Blade is make sure that it's on a backline carry, and hopefully you'll have enough gold to justify being kind of down an artifact late game. For our next artifact in the OK tier, we have Spectral Cutlass. Also a quick note, I added the buff icon to a few of the artifacts that I've missed, so if you want to go back and check where they're buffed, you can check out the patch notes or my artifact guide. But anyways, for Spectral Cutlass, we can see that it is currently the most unpopular artifact in the game, and I'm going to explain why. First, let's go over its stats. Spectral Cutlass gives your units 40% AD and 20% crit chance, but most importantly, it teleports the holder to the mirrored hex on the enemy side of the board. That means it's really positioning heavy, and in my opinion, it's not that good early game. You can check this by checking the stats of the artifact taken from Portable Forge on 2.1. I have this set to Masters Plus. And on 2.1, you can see that it averages 4.98, but if taken at 3.2, it's going to be slightly better. Main reason being, it's going to be pretty awkward to use early game, because I don't think that the teleportation effect will be as good, because you have less units on the board, meaning you'd want focus fire and honestly a more concentrated team. For example, if you have this early game board, which is a bunch of duelists, and you have like the Spectral Cutlass from somewhere, if Qiyana teleports here, she's actually not going to be untargetable, right? Zyra, Kayle, and Sivir will focus the Qiyana, while Garen and Jax will take the aggro from the front line. Now, it's a big possibility that Qiyana actually gets bursted, because most likely you won't have a lot of items early game. For example, if you had like a Qiyana 2 with Edge of Night somehow, then obviously it's going to be pretty good to put it. But for the most part, your units are squishier, and backline can easily execute early game holders of this artifact, so I don't think it's that good early. You can see over here that I put the best holders for this artifact to be stuff like Lee Sin, Qiyana, Rune 3, Gnar, Kayn. Basically like reroll bruisers or assassin type units. The worst holders will be backline carries and non-tanks. A pretty cool interaction that a few people discovered is if you put your frontline tank on the 3rd row and put Spectral Cutlass and then offset the rest of your units behind the tank or also in the 3rd row, you can see what happens over here. As an example, this is from TFT clips, shout out to them. Basically at the start of the fight, their TG holder rolls Spectral Cutlass, which is usually Grief, but he actually offsets his front line so that everyone on their team, except the Volibear, will focus this, and then the rest of the team can focus. So it can be interesting tech. I don't think it's particularly good, but it is an important interaction to note. Anyways, early game, I don't think it's that good. Put it on melee carries if you have to, if you know that they won't die instantly, or maybe you can even put it, or maybe you can even put it somewhere in the front so it doesn't completely Grief. Just make sure you know what you're doing when you position your units. Mid to late game is when something like Spectral Cutlass can shine, because if you build something like Edge of Night plus healing for most of these melee carries, they can actually pop off and execute enemy backliners if you position them correctly. For example, over here, this is a standard Ghostly Zyra board that you'll probably encounter sometime this patch, or maybe even next patch since they're buffing Ghostly. Basically, let's take the Kayn. If Kayn teleports here, he can actually like execute the Zyra, and even though they'll initially target the Kayn, he's gonna get invulnerability and aggro drop due to Edge of Night, and then maybe he's gonna be able to execute Zyra and potentially the kill, right? That's why Edge of Night's a great combo to build with this. So something like Spectral Cutlass plus Hand of Justice plus Edge of Night, and then you're gonna get some crit chance, and then Hands of Reaper, so he gets bonus crit damage and the ability to crit naturally if you activate the trait. It's gonna be a pretty good combo to him, right? But it's also important to note that for Kayn specifically, he does most of his damage once he transforms. So I've seen Kayn's with Spectral Cutlass actually struggle to like execute backline units. So it's not like extremely good in him. It can definitely work, but be careful, because sometimes your Kayn won't do as much damage as you think, right? Because he needs time to transform. So burst units like, for example, Gnar 3, Qiyana 3, Riven 3 are pretty good at bursting. If you have Spectral Cutlass and position them, for example, top right, there's a carry here. It can easily one-shot like this unit, right? Make sure you position correctly and put it on like frontline units. Lee Sin should use it decently too. Same with Wukong and Set. And then of course I have the Annie here if you ever want to try out the offsetting tank tech. Let me know if you try it and if it actually works well. I'm not sure. I've never tried it, only seen it. But yeah, in general though, Spectral Cutlass, as you can see here, pretty good combo with Edge of Night when playing something like Kayn. Put healing and it's a really good combo. And then you can see that the delta is slightly high. The reason I put it specifically in okay instead of like meh is because with really good positioning, you can definitely scam a lot of fights, but it's definitely pretty unpopular and not like the best artifact, right? Like Gnar uses it pretty well because he's super bursty. Same with Qiyana. It's like okay on the melee holder. So I'd probably not play this unless you're committed to one of these reroll melee comps, or you know that you can burst targets consistently by positioning Spectral Cutlass correctly. So for our next artifact, we have Seeker's Armguard, which did get buffed in patch 14.10, and it's a hybrid item that currently has an average of 4.61, and you can already see its best user here, right? Honestly, it's pretty unpopular and kind of on the niche end. Maybe it should be like niche but powerful, but I just put it in okay. You can see over here that it gives 30 AP, armor, and MR. Last patch, it was 25 of each, so they buffed each of these stats by 5. Basically, takedowns increase the holder's armor, MR, and AP by 10. Increase to 15 if they score the kill, right? So it's going to be a pretty good scaling artifact if a unit that specifically likes AP and resistances gets kills. And in my mind, there's only really 1 or 2 units that do that, right? Silas is definitely the best and most popular holder of Seekers for a reason. It's like what I've said throughout the whole video. Silas likes AP and resistances. He doesn't like HP that much, attack speed, or most other stuff. His scaling is mostly within AP. So obviously an artifact like this is going to be really good in Silas. Volley is interesting because honestly nowadays he's not rerolled that much. But if you do have a Volley 3 in a duelist setup and you have to take Seekers, it's not even bad on him if he's 3-starred. Because he can actually score kills and he'll utilize MR, AP, and magic resist as well. I think it's pretty bad on Volley 2, but Volley 2 is not the best unit anyways. Duelists are just broken as a whole group of units right now because of Lee Sin and Aurelia, so that's that. Early game holders, honestly, I can't really think of much if you ask me. Like probably someone like Darius who likes the AP, or a few like frontline bruiser mages, like maybe Yorick. Like there's not really much. I would just put this on Silas if you can like get him. Actually, I kind of want to check who people put it on early game. So as an example, on my document, there's a meta TFT and tactics.tools page. Meta TFT is cool because you can see early round holders. You have like, I guess it's decent on tanks early game then, like Darius, Garen, Nico. Yasuo has good win rates because they're really good early game units. I guess like the tanks that can really like score random kills sometimes, like Shen with his true damage, or Nico with her ability can utilize this and get the tankiness pretty well. So look to put it on units like this, I guess. It's actually decent on tanks, but mid to late game, I'd really put it on mostly Silas. He is the Mage Seeker after all, right? He likes the AP and resistances, build stuff like Crown Guard Spark on him. He's gonna pop off. Then for other units, I think Udyr's decent with it. If he's upgraded, he can definitely score a few takedowns and kills. And then he's gonna be super tanky. He likes AP. I don't think it's the best thing on him, but he can definitely utilize it pretty effectively. Then visit the sleeper OP use of Seeker's Armguard. I'm pretty sure it's Shen's second best artifact after Death's Dance or Death's Defiance. So you swap 2 Guinsus on Shen, and his last item being Seeker's Armguard. Only when you have his hero augment Ethereal Blades, he's gonna pop off. And I can show you over here. You see it's not built that much in Masters, but it's really good on an Ethereal Blade Shen. And the reason being, he really likes armor. He can utilize AP because it scales with the damage reduction of his ability, and he basically likes armor, AP, and resistances, right? So it's perfect for him. And since Shen takes a lot of the kills in the comp, because he does a lot of true damage with Ethereal Blades, it's going to be really good on him. I recommend it. It's his second best artifact after DD. I've seen people try to put it on stuff like Annie. You can actually see that Annie's the second most popular. I don't think it's that good. Like, sure, she can utilize the AP okay and the extra armor and MR, but I think it's pretty wasted on her. That's why this artifact's not picked that much. And I don't think it's good on backliners at all. Like, it's bad on Morgana. It's really bad on Ornn, bad on Syndra. Like, I saw someone saying something like Seeker's Armguard and LUDEN'S Tempest, but I'm pretty sure it's just bad. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if this is like hidden tech, but like, I don't think Seekers is meant to be put on AP backliners, right? I think of something like just mages, like frontline bruiser mages, and Silas is the prime example. So I put it on these units, Silas, Shen with his augment, and Udyr, and that's really it for Seeker's Armguard. So our last artifact in the OK tier will be LUDEN'S Tempest, which is an AP artifact. It also got buffed in patch 14.10, and you can see over here that it has an average of 4.62, with one of its most popular users being Lilia. It's pretty unpopular overall. The main gist of this artifact is that it does overkill damage, so it actually gives 35% AD and AP. I believe this was 30 each before the buffs. But basically 100% of overkill damage plus 100 is dealt as magic damage to 3 enemies nearest to the target. So the important part is overkill. Basically, Mortdog has the best explanation for it. The link's also going to be in the artifact doc, but basically, he said if a Caitlyn ult hits for 2000 damage, and let's say the person has 500 health, now you shoot 1500 plus 100 bolts to 3 people, because LUDEN'S gives 100 base. So the overkill damage of 1500 plus 100 will be dealt to the 3 nearest enemies. If those kill someone, it actually changes. So if you have a unit that does a lot of burst damage overall, like in one ability or ult, LUDEN'S is going to be pretty good at them, right? And right now, honestly, there aren't that many units that do like an amazing amount of burst. Obviously, there's the meme of like Caitlyn 3 one-shotting with like 2k damage the backline, but Caitlyn can get blocked and it's pretty inconsistent. The best holders would be something like Koboko, and the Lucky Paws augment is actually decent. Zoe 3 does a lot of burst. Kog'Maw 3 when he's reroll does a lot of burst. And it's okay on the invokers. I wouldn't call it good. And then the worst holders are by far Syndra and Morgana. Like, I know it's a good item on Syndra on League, but I'm gonna explain to it later why it's super bad, okay? Early game, you basically just want to put it on like AP units if you somehow have this artifact. Ahri's pretty good because she does decent overkill damage sometimes. If you have her paired with Syndra early or like Kindred, she can definitely do a lot of damage with other AP items. Caitlyn, obviously you're not gonna be rerolling Caitlyn for the most part unless you're playing like Kog'Maw reroll, and then even then it's not the best. But if you have a random Caitlyn 2 angling snipers, you somehow have a LUDEN'S, sure, put it on Caitlyn, she can do overkill damage, snipe the backline, and chain the effect. Alu and Zoe are also like whatever, like burst damage mages, I guess. Just like if you have this early, put it on the mage that you think will do the most AP damage, or just put it on the mage or unit that you think will just do the most instance of damage in one ult or ability, right? Then mid to late game, it's pretty simple. Koboko and his hero augment has okay stats with it. It's unknown. I don't think it's that good, but this guy's basically like one punch man if you get him going. You always want to build tank items with Lucky Paw, so if you pair it with a LUDEN'S, it's okay. Because if Koboko like smacks a low HP unit, he can actually do pretty funny chain damage, right? One of the first artifact VODs from the new like wave of artifacts I ever watched actually was someone, I think his name was Ice from CN, fighting a LUDEN'S Tempest Koboko with innervating Locket. So he can definitely do work. Then for the other units, like Zoe 3 is going to be pretty good because she does a lot of burst damage with her ricochets. I actually think that if you 3-star Zoe and put like a Shojin plus like JG or like Rabadons, or maybe even like Shiv on her because it's pretty decent. By the way, I also think that because of the new Ladok video, he basically debunked the thing where Zoe can get more ricochets through takedown. She needs kills, so maybe Shiv isn't hidden OP. But you can check out his newest short if you want to like confirm that. But basically LUDEN'S is like okay on Azir and Lilia. They do decent burst damage, especially Azir with his ult, but I don't think it's like particularly good. And for Kog'Maw, if you pair it with his Bis, blue buff, Nashers plus LUDEN'S, it's gonna be really good on him, right? Aim to build LUDEN'S overall with units that have high damage single instances from their ability or ultimate. So that'll bring me to the next part. Where is it completely terrible to build LUDEN'S? These 3 units. Just think about it, right? Syndra does not do any overkill damage. Her ult is in waves because of her butterflies. She starts with, this should be 7 each cast, and next patch it's actually going to be 6. She's not going to do overkill, man. It's her worst artifact by far. Do not build LUDEN'S on Syndra in TFT. Feel free to build it on her League. Don't do it in TFT, man. It's straight up terrible. LUDEN'S is probably the worst artifact on her. Then Morgana is like, I don't think she does overkill damage as well. We can confirm it over here. It's a plus 0.44 delta. On Syndra, it's just egregiously bad. And then like for a lot of the units, it's pretty bad, honestly. So it's only really good on like the invokers like Lilia and Azir. It's not like the best on Azir, but it's whatever. But just like the units I have here are what you should be striving to put it on. Maybe in future sets they'll have like really cool kaboom like instance damages from ultimates. But right now for the most part, you should just put LUDEN'S on these units. And if you have an angle for Sage Lilia or any of these, try it out. Otherwise, I don't think it's good. It's okay at best. So now we're gonna move on to the artifacts that are pretty niche but can be definitely powerful if given to the right units. Basically all of these are going to be extremely good on specific units, and outside of them won't be that effective. So first let's talk about Wit's End. Now currently Wit's End is averaging a 4.28 in Masters Plus, which is really good, and for one reason you can see him right here. It's going to be Bard. Wit's End is the Bard artifact. We check out over here. Wit's End gives your unit 30% attack speed and 30 MR, and attacks deal 42 to 100 bonus magic damage. So it gives your units the ability to do bonus magic damage, and it also heals the holder for all magic damage dealt. Bard is so good with his artifact because it's everything he wants. He really likes attack speed. He attacks really fast with his meeps, and since he's a trick shot, it spreads to the team, and all this bonus damage will heal Bard, and his biz is basically double Guinsoo's and Gunblade. So as a Gunblade replacement, it's insane of him. Just build this on Bard, trust me. In my guide, I actually yapped about how good it was on him and how it turns him into a monster if you manage to 3-star it with 2 Rage Blades. So if you want to check that out, it's in the description as usual. But this artifact is also pretty good in Ashe in this meta and Volibear 3, but the worst holders are going to be basically everyone else, right? Sylas, I don't think it's that good in him. Syndra, Morgana, it's like a positive 0.10 delta on Lilia, but that's just because Lilia's a cheater and she's just really good right now in the Sage variant and most variants, so that's really it for her. Early game, you just want to put this on transition units that will utilize attack speed pretty well, because WIT'S will enable them to do magic damage from the ability, right? The attacks will deal bonus magic damage. So Sivir, Zyra, Caitlyn, Darius, like backliners will use it to a decent degree. But if you're rerolling Bard, you want to transition to the board as quickly as possible. The best holders will definitely be Bard. Its Biz is Guinsoo's, 2 Guinsoo's and WIT'S. It's going to hit really hard, and it's great. It's also good in Ashe, and honestly, the main reason why is because this Ashe comp is super tanky. I'll put like another ward in here to round it out. But basically, Ashe will do the bonus magic damage because WIT'S allows her to do that. And paired with the Guinsoo's, it's basically her Gunblade replacement. When played with a 4 sniper setup, it's actually pretty good on her. And obviously, you always want Guinsoo's Rage Blade on Ashe for the attack speed, and it's her best item. So WIT'S, Guinsoo's Rage Blade, and something like Last Whisper or an Infinity Edge would be a pretty good combo, right? Don't build Gunblade WIT'S because it's double healing. And then it's also pretty decent on Volibear 3. Now, the reason why is because he attacks really fast and can actually utilize the healing and bonus magic damage. So if you somehow have a Volley 3 in the meta where it's like fast 8 duelist, if you just hit him randomly, like it's actually a pretty good artifact on him, right? Like you can do like Titan's Crown Guard, Adaptive Helm, pair it with WIT'S, basically throw leftover tank items, or those are the best holders. I think that the worst holders will be like everyone else. I don't think it's good in Syndra. It's bad in Morgana. I don't think it's that good in Wei Azir. It's not a BT replacement, so it's not gonna like can Lee Sin, and don't put this on your tank. Sylas is a plus 0.26 delta. I don't think it's that good. Someone like Lilia, like the reason why it's a plus 0.10 is because she's just a cheater, so she can actually like do magic damage, and it will probably help her win the mirror. But for the most part, it should be Bard, Ashe, Volibear are the only good units. Everyone else is a positive delta. Aphelios is also pretty good just because like he's a sniper and same concept of Ashe, but yeah, I'd really only put it on those units. Alright, so next in niche but powerful, we have SILVERMERE Dawn. This is a AD artifact that grants a lot of AD, but it has a downside. Currently, it averages 4.3 in Masters Plus, and it's a really low play rate. It is a pretty scary artifact to pick, and I'm going to tell you why. It gives 165% AD, 50 armor, and 50 MR. Even better, it grants the user immunity to stuns and makes the holder be able to stun the target for 0.8 seconds. That's crazy. The downside is your unit's attack speed is locked at 0.5. You're gonna be really slow. So you just really want to put this on units that don't care about being slow but are gonna hit insane with a given AD. Best holders: Gnar, Riven. This is insane on Riven reroll. I'm pretty sure if you have the random spot for it, like a Bruiser Crest or Well-Fed or like something. Also good on Wukong, Set, and I think it's like decent on Kayn because he doesn't really care as much, but he can actually hit pretty hard. Do not build this on duelists like Irelia, Lee Sin. Don't build it on Sylas because he likes AP, and don't build it on most units. Simple, that's it. Your units will be able to stun and stun the target for 0.8 seconds, and for the most part, build it on Gnar, Riven, Wukong, Kayn, it's okay, and Set. Please don't build it on duelists that like attack speed when it locks it. Also, don't build it on backline carries like Ashe and Kai'Sa. Really simple. Like, if you want to check yourself here, you can see Set, Wukong, Gnar, Riven. Okay on Set, good on Wukong, because Wukong will good on Wukong. This is because Wukong's gonna hit really hard with his staff, even though he attacks super slow. Great on Gnar, insane on Riven. I think the reason why the stats are insane for Riven is because she's a pretty niche like reroll comp. You usually don't see people reroll her, but ever since they buffed her ability scaling, where the AD scales a lot harder, she can actually hit like a truck, and if you amplify it with SILVERMERE Dawn and reroll her, it's gonna be insane. Yeah, it's trash on Lee Sin, Irelia. It's actually pretty decent on Illaoi. I guess the tentacles will get summoned and she'll be immune to stuns and be able to stun the enemy team. But yeah, that's it. Next in our list, we have Forbidden Idol, which is a tank artifact. It currently averages 4.55 in Masters Plus. And you can already see its best user over here, Tahm Kench. And the reason why is that shields have 50% of their value converted to max health instead. It gives your units 25 armor, MR, and health if they equip it. And it's basically like a shield conversion to max HP. It's really good on Tahm Kench. It's decent in Cho'Gath reroll. It's not good on anyone else. So for the early game holders, if you have this and don't have a Tahm Kench yet, you should know that the units that have shield on their kits for the tanks are Yasuo, Garen, Cho, Thresh, Rek'Sai, and Illaoi. Mid to late game, just put it on Tahm Kench. I'm sure a few of you have seen the Tahm Kenches with over 1 million health. If they have 2 of this artifact, if they have 1, they have like 10 to 20k health. Even a TK2 with this artifact will be really tanky. Like, I'm pretty sure I saw someone in tourney earlier, in the NA tourney, have a random Forbidden Idol on a Tahm Kench with like 8 bruiser. And it was 2-star and it tanked infinite. So it's pretty good. Just put it on Tahm Kench, whether you're rerolling TK, you have it in a bruiser setup, or anything. It's insane on him. It's insane on him. It's basically like a Tahm Kench artifact. Like, it's okay on Illaoi and Ornn. I wouldn't call it good, but I wouldn't really put it on them. It's pretty bad on Thresh because like his shielding honestly isn't that much. The shield will only be applied because Thresh applies shield to his allies as well, so he doesn't give himself that big of a shield. You can see here people like put it on Galio, Nautilus, Rakan, Annie, Amubu, and they just take big L's. Just don't put it on them. It's TK's item. It can actually do well in Cho'Gath reroll because this guy is really tanky and he can actually get a lot of shield. And usually Cho'Gath's best item when rerolled with Kog'Maw is gonna be like Dragon's Claw, Redemption, stuff that heals him. So if you have like Forbidden Idol, Dragon's Claw, Redemption, or like a random Bramble in the mix, it's gonna be pretty good. And then just a random moron mode thing I found out. It's good stats on Sylas. I'm like, wait, Sylas doesn't shield himself, right? But if you think about it, Sylas is an Umbral unit that's often played in the Umbral comp or sometimes in Sage Sylas. But one of his best items is Crown Guard, which gains a 30% max health shield for your units for 8 seconds. And he's also an Umbral unit, which grants, I think this is 900 shield. Your Sylas is gonna get HP for free. So if you just randomly are playing like 6 Umbral Sylas with the Crown Guard, like, it's honestly not the worst thing I've seen. I know the stats are in Emerald Plus, but like, sort this by Masters, no one really does it because like, come on. But it's not even bad. Like, you can see even people try to cook like, maybe there's like a random like Crown Guarded Forbidden Idol 6 Umbral Sylas line. But yeah, this is some random thing I'm yapping about. Just put it on TK and Cho'Gath 3 for reroll and Kog'Maw. That's it. So the next niche but powerful artifact we have is Blighting Jewel. This got a buff last patch and it's currently performing pretty decently. You can see over here that it averages a 4.54 in Masters Plus, and it spoiled you like the best users. It's just Teemo and Morgana. Reason being is that dealing magic damage reduces the target's MR by 4. If their MR is 0, this grants the holder 5 mana instead, and it grants 40 AP as well, which isn't bad. The buff to this artifact was the reduction in MR. It used to be 3 and now it's 4, so it's a pretty big jump. And basically, it's just a really good Teemo and Morgana artifact because these two units are the really only ones that have good DOT damage over time. And Teemo will be able to use this really well because he spreads it across the whole enemy team, and their MR will be ticked down really low. It's like a form of shred, right? If you have these two units. And although Morgana can be a little bit inconsistent in their targeting, even with the new like targeting fixes to her, it's really good in her. So I just built it really on Teemo and Morgana. And Leduc also had a video where he basically said that any magic damage procs from a unit that holds Blighting Jewel will count as the instance that will reduce target's MR, right? So a specific example he gave was Tattoo of Toxin. All instances of Tattoo of Toxin apply as a dot over time as well. So in this video that you should check out, it's in my artifact doc or on his YouTube channel. Basically, if you have like a Teemo or Morgana with Blighting Jewel and Tattoo of Toxin, it will shred the enemy team really, really fast. And I don't think it's intended, but right now, if you have this combo, be sure to use it. Worst holders, it's just like Syndra. I don't think it's that good in Syndra. There's like this, like, I guess, dream of Syndra shredding all the tanks one by one, but ideally you just have like shred from something like Static Shiv or Spark on a tank. It gives 40 AP, and like Syndra does like mana, but she likes mana more from blue buff because it reduces her overall mana from 30 to 20. She doesn't like really like the extra mana once a user's MR is low that much, and she has like the chance to mana lock or have mana overflow that I talked about during MANAZANE. So yeah, it's basically a Teemo and Morgana artifact. Really good in them, not that good in anyone else. Alright, so next in niche but powerful, we have Lich Bane. This one is really simple. It currently averages a 4.46, and the only reason it averages that is because it's really good in Kindred and no one else. It gives 30 AP and 15 mana, and basically the holder's first attack after each ability cast deals 180 to 420 damage, which scales with stage. And yeah, it got buffed in patch 14.10. I believe they buffed the magic scaling damage part, but this artifact is just Kindred's artifact. It's really good because she's a blue buff holder. You'd think that blue buff holders would be really good with this, so something like Lilia, Syndra, maybe Morgana is something people have experimented with, but it's not good because Syndra stands still. When she casts, Morgana targets random stuff, and Lilia is like, she uses blue buff well, but she doesn't cast really fast. It's just, yeah, it's just really a Kindred item, right? Like, I've tested a lot of configurations and watched other units with this. It's a Kindred item. Build it with Kindred blue buff, you're gonna be really happy. Build it on anyone else, you'll be pretty disappointed. Like, there is merits to putting it on like a Silas, but I don't think it's that good. It's Kindred's artifact. Minus 0.82 delta. So the next niche but powerful artifact that we have is Talisman of Ascension. You can see the axe in the bottom right because this actually got nerfed in the 14.9 B patch for a really good reason. I'm gonna show you in a bit. Right now it averages a 4.49. It's a decent artifact, taken like 0.08 out of 8 play rate, and you can kind of see already why and where we're going here. Koboko. If you check in patch 14.9, you can see that this artifact was beyond broken with an insane pick rate, an insane win rate, and all that stuff. And the reason why is that basically Talisman of Ascension gives your units 20 AD, 20 AP, 400 health, all good hybrid stats. But the thing is, after 22 seconds, your units gain 100% max health and 150% increased damage for the rest of combat. This is insane. Basically, if your unit lives after 22 seconds, they should basically be almost unkillable and you should win the fight, right? The thing was, this artifact used to have 400 base health, 150% damage instead of 120. Sorry, this should actually be 120. And 18 seconds time to proc. 4 seconds is really a lot of time in TFT. I think that on average, fights late game should last like in that threshold, like maybe 18 or like 25 seconds. And honestly, at the point where 22 seconds elapses, you should already know if you're losing or winning a fight. So right now, the worst holders of this artifact will be most backline and tank units, like Ashe, Syndra, Lilia, and Silas. I really don't think it's that good in them anymore. If at 22 seconds you need like something like Talisman to bail you out, I feel like you're already losing the game in general. So we can confirm it with the stats later, but basically what makes this artifact niche and powerful is it is insane with, I think, 4 out of 5 of the hero augments. So Yorick's Midnight Siphon is really good in. Koboko's Lucky Paws is insane. And same with Shen's Ethereal Blades. It's also good with Garen right now. Garen's like the best comp in the game in 14.10B. And since you know I recorded this late, my bad. It's not going to be as good because they're reverting his mana buff. But it should still be really good in him, right? Like, the reason why this artifact is so good on these units, here are examples of really good builds on them, is because these are super tank hero augments that allow them to basically stall for so long and be alive, right? If you've ever played against one of these hero augments, you'll know that they're super tanky and they're set up around them. Koboko is played in vertical bruisers. Shen is in vertical behemoths. Same with Yorick. He'll be played in vertical behemoths mostly, but sometimes in the umbral setup, which can be tanky and stall out as well. And Garen is such an unkillable monster. If you don't have like really good burst damage, these units won't die. And it doesn't matter if the fight takes 22 seconds, because generally fights against these 3-star hero augments will take that long anyways. And once they proc the Talisman of Ascension, they're nearly unkillable. Basically, you have to like pray that you like kill these units before a Talisman proc. So these 4 hero augments is pretty good. I think it's okay on Nico's hero augment. It's not like as good, because I think with her you want really like this BT Titans and like Archangels or ZHONYA'S or like some AP item, but still decent on her. But I would just put this on the hero augments right now. We can even check the stats for ourselves right here. This is patch 14.9, patch 14.10V, plus 0.23 on Silas, Irelia, Syndra. Really badly, like you're never putting out Duelist, man. You want to burst them. Bad on Lilia. Oh, but what's this? It's good on Yorick. Good, really good in Koboko and Garen. Reason why? It's really good on their hero augments. That's it. Like I know there's a few people that still like putting this on their backline units, and you know, if you're unlucky enough to have a Talisman of Ascension playing non-hero augments, then Just try to put it on the unit that will live the longest, but for the most part, put it on Lucky Paws, Story Champion, Midnight Siphon, or Ethereal Blades. That's it. So our last artifact in niche but powerful is Corrupt Vampiric Scepter, also known as CVS for me. It actually got buffed in patch 14.10, so its play rate and average placement got a bit higher. But this artifact is like super niche, and I'm gonna show you why. It currently averages 4.6, which isn't the worst, but it has a really low play rate. It's the second lowest played artifact in Masters Plus, next to Spectral CUTLASS. The reason why is that it has a really good stats and an effect. It gives you 15% attack speed, and attacks will deal an additional 15% AD as physical damage, and they will heal the holder for the damage dealt. 50% attack damage is massive because it scales upon a unit's like base AD, right? And all the items on them. So it's gonna be insane. The problem is the holder cannot cast their ability or gain mana. GG. So this can grief 90% of the units in TFT, right? Because most units are obviously going to be designed with their ult in mind. So the fact that it's just disabled and they can't cast their ultimate, even though it gives a lot of AD, it's really scary to build if you don't know who to put it on, right? But don't worry, that's what I'm here for. Don't worry, that's what I'm here for. The best holders and the only holders of CVS are Gnar, Irelia, and recently I discovered Qiyana's decent as well. Worst holders is everyone else. Like, the reason why is that Gnar and Irelia don't really care about their ultimate ability that much. Gnar throws a rock, but he hits like a truck, and Gnar really likes healing already, right? So if you reroll Gnar in metas that are really good for him, or just have a good reroll Gnar spot, it's gonna be really good. And Irelia, I swear to God, this unit is so good with CVS. I know right now Irelia's in the meta, and it's part of one of the best comps because of Fast 8 Duelist. But if you manage to get this artifact on her, you won't be disappointed. I watched like at least 3 or 4 pro players try this, and it's insane. It's always been really good. Basically, her blades will whirl across the screen, do massive 80 damage even at 1 star, and CVS will basically deal so much damage that she'll basically be able to heal the full. I think like yesterday, Ladok posted a new video where Irelia 2 with a Corrupt Vampiric Scepter and a few other items can actually solo Crab in Crab Wave, because she just heals everything. That's crazy, right? So I highly recommend you check that video out and just build these artifacts on these two. I did a few stats checking with Qiyana 3. It actually doesn't seem the worst, because Qiyana, like, obviously she likes her ultimate where she twirls her weapon across the screen and like hits the enemies, but a random Qiyana 3 Corrupt Vampiric Scepter can definitely run over enemy teams. So that's really it. And last note is that when playing Gnar or Irelia, you don't want to build healing items on them, specifically on... You don't want to build healing items on them, obviously, like BT, specifically for Gnar. Guinsoo's actually becomes a really good item when you have CVS, right? And the reason being, the units won't ult, so they'll be able to massively cast and gain a lot of attack speed. I actually tested this in the stats and saw someone play it against me in PPE, and it cooked me. If you have CVS and Gnar, it's a bit blurry here because I don't want a full screen. The value of Guinsoo's Rage Blade is a lot higher. It's a minus 0.47 delta. Actually, like, one of the best combos, right? CVS plus Guinsoo's on Gnar. Interesting. So on the auto attacker units like Qiyana and Gnar, it's gonna be really good if you have Corrupt Vampiric Scepter. Put it on Gnar, Irelia, and Qiyana. That's it. No one else. So as we're approaching the bottom end of the tier list with an artifact in the med tier, we have Rapid Fire Cannon, also commonly known as RC. This did get buffed in patch 14.10, but it's still not good. The only reason why it's here and not recommended is because there's one unit in the game that is decent with it, and I'm gonna show it to you over here. You can see that it averages a 4.71, one of the worst artifacts. I sorted it by play rate, but all the way at the bottom here, along with Prowler's Claw. And the best user is Qiyana, and it's the only user because it basically grants your units 1 attack range increased by 1 whenever the holder kills an enemy. It got buffed from 50% to 60% AS, so it's actually a good amount of attack speed. But basically, it's bad right now, or not in the best state, because it didn't grief a lot of units. Rapid Fire Cannon used to be an item in the game, built with bow plus bow, but I explained over here in the history section that you can check out in my artifact guide. In set 9, they had to remove the item because some units in TFT historically abuse this really well, like the Bang Bros comp, Challengers with Yasuo, and then the most egregious, in my opinion, Bilgewater and Nala. This is the reason why I quit set 9.5, because of this unit and so many problems in that set with Legends. But now it's back as an artifact, and then hopefully in the future, they'll design maybe a few units in mind that can utilize this artifact well. But it's bad on a lot of units because they weren't designed right now with RC in mind, I think. So units like Darius, Lee Sin, and Nar will completely whiff their ults. Darius ults in a circle, he'll whiff it. Lee Sin kicks in front of him, he'll miss. Nar throws rocks and he'll miss. So Kiana's like really the only unit that can use RFC. I explained how her ult works here, but basically she won't bug out with her ult and can safely dash and find an angle to cleave enemies. Her ult will deal damage between enemies behind the target with the manifestation of her weapon. So the description's over here. Once her blades hit an enemy target, which will appear as glowing yellow blades, they'll extend and damage enemies with a range limit of 2 hexes. This refers to the second part of her ability. Her increased range doesn't extend the blades at all, which go in a straight line, but it's still good in her because her augmented cast will allow her to throw the blades. It will allow her to throw the blades in a safe place. I know it's a bit complicated, but basically this video from Alan, I know it said goodie before, I'm sorry, I corrected it. It said that RFC Kiana has potential, but her ult only goes 2 hex further than her target. So basically you can see from Alan's clip that is available on YouTube, he basically stands back and you can see like these things that extend from an enemy whenever they hit. It's only 2 hexes, right? Kiana does gain the range increase once she kills the target, but these like shuriken things, they don't ever extend past like the whole map. So she does get a range increase to create distance separation, but these things are only always 2 range, right? So it has potential in her, but it's not like particularly like super broken, right? Unlike the other niche artifacts. So you can just see it right here to confirm it. It's not even a negative delta, man. It's like plus 0.12. Like, it can do work on her, but every other unit is bad with it. Like, it does say Lissandra has good stats, and the only reason why is because Lissandra can definitely lock down comps. I've had a game where I had like Mittens Lissandra, which gives insane attack speed, and I put a Shojin on it, and it just locked down enemy duelists. So if there's like a random melee matchup and you have a Lissandra too, you can definitely try to cheese them with Shojin, RC, plus like any unit, plus like any item. But yeah, like a Kiana item, if it is one, it's bad on most units, it's okay on Lissandra, and that's it. And for a final artifact, we have Prowler's Claw. I put it in the not recommended tier, and I'm going to explain why in a bit. It's the worst performing artifact in the game. It's pretty unpopular with a play rate of 0.04 out of 8. And you can see the best holder is Kane, but basically the reason why it's so bad is that either there's like a bug with it where it doesn't work with the crit strikes, or it's just really poorly statted and inconsistent. So let me just read to you what it does. It gives your units 30% AD and 30% crit chance. It used to be 25 each, so they buffed it slightly. And after killing a target, shed negative effects and dash to the furthest target within 4 hexes. The next 2 crit strikes should deal 60% bonus crit damage. Now, just by reading this, it seems like a really good item for your melee carries, right? But first of all, I've heard like some things about maybe the crit strike is bugged. That could be a reason. I can't 100% confirm. I heard like this show up in Frodance, like second episode of their podcast together, which is really good. Highly recommend checking it out. Say it was bugged. I don't know if they fixed it or not, but the second reason is the dashes are pretty inconsistent because you'll never be able to figure out the target within 4 hexes usually, right? Like you let the units go on the board, and similar to how Kha'Zix's ability works, it can be inconsistent. Obviously, if your unit's a straight up mega genius and just like kills an enemy, and the unit actually has to kill someone, once they kill an enemy and dash to like the enemy backline, it's gonna be really good, right? But you can't even like consistently do that. So I just looked at the stats. I've tested it a lot in Chong's Treasure and once in ranked, and I'll probably never do it again unless they change something about the artifact. I feel like it's just too inconsistent right now. It should be good in these units and Kane, but yeah, like you just look at the stats, and I'm not really down to build an artifact where it's just worse on everyone you put it on. Whether it's bugged, whether because it's inconsistent, I don't know. This is really the only artifact that I don't recommend you build in patch 14.10b. That's it. All of it for the artifacts, and now I'm going to talk about the support items a bit. I won't talk about them as much, but they are pretty simple and have pretty decent effects overall. So I'll just go over it really quick. We have Knight's Vow, Spite, and the Eternal Flame that got buffed in patch 14.10. So their average placements actually went up by 0.3 about for each one, and they used to be all in this tier, and now they're good. And right now, a reason why a lot of these support items are performing better is because of the rise of duelists. Duelists can abuse so many of these artifacts like Locket, Spite, Aegis. Aegis gives resistances. This one buffs your team's AD and AP and debuffs the enemy team in a certain radius. This one gives resistances in the line. Knight's Vow gives Omnivamp. Banshee's Veil gives CC immunity. Cleaver is obviously really good shred in general. This one gives attack speed. Moonstone Renewer is just broken in all comps and gives shielding. Like, since Duelist is currently the best comp in the game, and honestly, looking at patch 14.11's notes, probably won't get nerfed. I haven't seen any major nerfs to it. It's still gonna be really good. So a lot of the artifacts are better because Duelists have been on the rise and it's one of the best comps in the game, and they use a lot of the support items well. And yeah, so I'm gonna just go over each support item really quick. It does have sections with support items, which isn't that lengthy, but it's like 15 to 20 pages. I go over each support item and say their use cases and why they're good. Right now, you should basically know that Moonstone's broken, and then most of them are in a pretty good spot, but these three aren't that good. I'm gonna go over each of them really briefly. Overview, I said here, they're powerful items that grant units and your team support, and they can give units shielding, healing, combat power, and all that different stuff. They're different from the artifacts because they can work well on your team depending on what you need. And some support items will just be stronger than others in general in certain setups, right? Moonstone Renewer is still broken. They're actually nerfing this in patch 14.11. They're going to change the scaling HP values to be nerfed. I know I'm releasing this really late and I apologize, but I'm going to be more consistent hopefully in the next few weeks and next time I upload stuff. But just click it right now, next 2 days. It still should be good in 14.11. I don't expect it to fall that much. It just won't be broken anymore, right? There's an artifact that gives you shielding for the 2 lowest percent health allies for a bunch of health based on the stage. And also, you really want to be putting this on a holder that won't die, backline holders. If the Moonstone Renewer holder dies, it won't give shield. So put it on any backline holder that isn't your carry. Next, we have Banshee's Veil. This is really good in melee comps because at combat start, it grants the holder and allies within 1 hexes in the same row immunity to CC and attack speed for 18 seconds. This is really good because it's basically a replacement for QSS, and any of your allied units that has the Banshee's effect with it, you don't have to build QSS anymore. And it melee comps really like CC immunity. You can dodge stuff like Eternal Winter, CC from units like Nautilus, stuns from Lysandra and stuff like that. It's really strong. And since Duelists are on the rise and are a really good comp, and I don't expect them to be worse next patch at 14.11, Banshee's Veil should still be a really strong option. Highly recommend it. You just position it like this. For example, Kiana, Lee Sin, and Volibear. It's going to give the CC immunity for 18 seconds to all of these units. So yeah, just make sure you move around the Kiana and make sure you move her in conjunction with other units. Same with any holders you have with Banshees, and you should be set. Next, we have Virtue of the Martyr. Every 5 seconds, heal your team for 7% of their max health. When the holder dies, the healing increases. It gets doubled to 14% for 2 additional heals. Now, this is basically a sustain item that gives your team more HP and healing. It's really good because right now in the meta, there's a lot of backline access and damage. So obviously, and basically a little healing will never hurt. You really want to be putting this on a unit that isn't your primary tank, but isn't like the first unit to die. It's pretty weird. Like, try putting it on like a secondary tank or like tanky units that could be on the outside of your team. For example, I put it on like maybe Ilawi or Riven. You really don't want it on your Shen because the tank stats aren't that good. You don't want it on your primary tank because it only gives 250 health. Let's put it on like off tanks in general. So next we have Obsidian Cleaver. I put this in the great tier and I've seen other people's tier lists have it in good. The only reason is that I just really value building Shred and Sunder a lot, and basically having this on a good applier makes it so that you don't have to build Shred or Sunder anymore, right? Shred is really good for AP comps because it zaps magic resist, and then Sunder is really good in AD comps or carries where you have a primary AD composition because it reduces enemy armor, right? So it also gives 8% AD and AP to your team, which isn't the most, but it's definitely pretty okay. This is a lot better than your regular Shred items because it lasts for 15 seconds. 15 seconds is a lot, guys. Like, if I go over to the items over here, you can see that the Sunder item, Last Whisper, for AD comps only lasts for 3 seconds with physical damage. And for example, we have like Static Shiv, which you build on backliners for AP comps that want Shred, Zap Magic Resist. It lasts for 5 seconds, right? This lasting 15 seconds, in my opinion, is really valuable. And in my opinion, the most important part about having Cleaver is, number 1, not putting it on your primary carry because it doesn't give any carry stats. And number 2, finding that secondary unit that will apply it best for different comps. Over here, I wrote like general like good appliers for each of the meta comps, and if any of the meta comps shift or new ones come, of course, I'm always going to update this document. But if you want to check for yourself, you just go to tactics.tools. You need Advanced Explorer, but I've always recommended this in the beginning because it gives you so much access to so many information, right? So you have like Lilia 2 in the Sage comp. I'm going to use Sage Lilia as an example. You put 3 Sage, You put like all the secondary units like Morgana, you can see them here. You can add them even directly by clicking on their portrait. Diana, Morgana, Nautilus, Nico, Flowey. Yeah, like you're probably playing like Zyra and Janna as well. Like you can just see, this is really useful because you can see what units are played in the comp, and then doing this, I know there's a lot of units. All you have to do is put, all you have to do is put Obsidian Cleaver. I call it Black Cleaver because I think that's the name in League. And I play some of the top lane champions when I play the game. Unlucky. So I call it Black Cleaver. But basically here, you can see the best appliers of Obsidian Cleaver for your comp. I mean, Masters doesn't have a lot of data, but you can clearly see you're playing Sage Lillia with at least 3 Sage. It's best on Morgana. And if you put like the sample size down to like 10, you can see like all the appliers, right? Like Wukong is really good. Janna is pretty decent. Rakan is actually really good in this comp, right? Because Rakan ults towards the enemy team, and he's able to apply Shred and Sunder to everyone in his like ult radius. Then it's obviously not gonna be good on Lilia because she's your primary carry. You don't want Obsidian Cleaver on a primary carry. So just put it on anyone that it says is good for your specific comp. And over here, I put some examples of good units. I actually update Rakan now that I figured it out. But for Forest Sniper, for Ward and Ashe, you have Aphelios and Aset as good holders. For the hero augments, Lord Champion, Lucky Paws, you have any of the backliners. I think Irelia is particularly good. And all the stuff in between, right? Just check the document or feel free to pause. But that's it for Black Cleaver. I really like Shred and Sunder. It's necessary. And if I take this artifact, I don't have to build it. I'll rate it in like low grade tier. Next we have ZZ'ROT. You could argue that this is like a tier below in good. But I just think it's a really, really insane early game. If you take it like 2-1 from like something like support cash on 2-1 or an early support encounter, it just gives you a lot of frontline. It summons a large like cockroach looking void spawn, and the strength and HP scales with stage. Now, this used to be pretty meta with the augment Fine Vintage because you'd basically take, hopefully hit a lot of ZZ'ROTs and buff them with a lot of the aura items, but they did nerf Fine Vintage a lot. It takes a lot longer to proc. I think it's like 4 or 5 turns now. So right now, ZZ'ROT is just a generic, solid support item that can definitely help frontlines for many teams. And this support item can also be obtained from one of the fortune cash outs with 70 luck. I call cap on this because I swear to God, this does not feel like a 70 luck cash out. And I've gotten this one in the 70 breakpoint at least 3 times more than all the others. I've actually bought forward with it once, and I've placed like second twice and first 2 times, I think, with this cash out. So I really hate it. But if you get it from this one, good luck. All right, so next we have Zeke's Herald. This one is an aura item that grants 30% attack speed to the holder and allies within 2 hexes in the same row. Now, this one is just solid in most comps because I think comps will actually like attack speed. Particularly, I think of like the AD carries like Ashe and Kai'Sa will like this, but most team compositions will be able to utilize this effect. It's just a really good, solid support item that will boost your damage because of AS. It's an aura item, remember. So it actually applies to 2 adjacent units instead of 1. So for example, I'll put a Zeke's Herald here. Like, just imagine these are backline units, right? Like early game as well, when you have like 3, 4, or 5 units, you can actually backline the guy with Zeke's and apply it to your whole team. Like I've seen people do stuff like this. Like for example, a Sivir and like, I don't know, like an Ari, like early game units, like Garen instead of this. You have different units. Basically, like instead of frontlining and only giving it to your frontline early game, you can actually have stuff like Zeke's and later Locket apply to your whole team, right? Because early game positioning is still important, but something like this giving attack speed to your whole team can be valuable, right? Like it's definitely a lot more viable early game than late game, where basically in late stages of the game, you only want to be applying Zeke's to your backline and Locket to your frontline because you don't want to grief your positioning and get CC'd to hell by stuff like Nautilus, Lissandra, Udyr, or Disrupted in general. So yeah, it's just a solid support item. So next we have RANDUI'N'S Omen. We have combat start. It grants 30 armor and MR to the holder and adjacent allies. Now this is an aura item that I'd say is a lot better early game because it's pretty positioning dependent. I quickly made this to show you that early game you're going to see a lot of people position like this with RANDUI'N'S to give as much of your team value as possible with the armor and MR. Because late game you really don't want to be clumping like this, right? Like I said earlier, you just want to be giving it to your frontline mainly. So it's a lot better early game because it gives you a lot of armor and MR, and you won't get punished as much with CC threats. I just think it's really good early game and falls off a cliff late game. Next, we have Knight's Vow. Now, this one got buffed in patch 14.10b. It got changed from 12% to 15% Omnivamp. And as you guys know already, duelists are really meta and probably like one of the best comps in the game. So obviously Knight's Vow is upticked in value. This used to average, actually, let me show you. I think it used to average like a 4.79. So we sort by support items over here. We see something like Knight's Vow. We can see that patch 14.10b, it averaged a 4.44, which is really good. Then in patch 14.9b, 4.68. And the reason why it's super good is because it's insane in duelist comps, right? You can even see by the delta, they're all just the duelists, right? Like Kane is obviously good with Omnivamp, but he isn't that good of a unit right now. So picking something like Knight's Vow to play like suboptimal melee comp in the meta, like Kane will tank the placement. It doesn't mean it's bad on melee comps like Kane. It just means that if you're angling something like Knight's Vow in a melee comp, you should be probably angling duelists instead of something like Yone, Reroll, or Kane, which aren't as good in the meta, right? So yeah, Knight's Vow is just solid. It's an aura item, so it gives the Omnivamp to the holder and allies within 1 hex in the same row. So put it on a holder that doesn't mind being moved around a bunch. Yeah, just good item right now for duelists. So next we have Chalice of Power. This one's pretty straightforward. This is the Q cone that gives 25 AP and 10 mana to the holders and allies within 2 hexes in the same row. So it's gonna give your units benefits in this positioning over here. We have Chalice of Power, and basically it's just solid support item that gives AP and mana. I personally think it's underwhelming, and it's really only good like super late game, because late game you have so many of the broken units with their ultimates and a lot of the high impact legendary units like Azir, Hui, Lissandra, maybe even Udyr. You have like all of your backliners that are AP online, like Syndra, Lilia, Morgana, like maybe Zoe 3, Elune 3, stuff like that, right? Like I kind of think it's really mid early game and a lot better late game, so I would take it probably in later stages, because the mana is a lot of value when you consider the units you play late game that are AP, right? And then the AP is also really good as well. 25 AP is not the most, but it's definitely something you can't ignore. All right, so next we have Locket. This one, at combat start, the holders and allies within 2 hexes in the same row will gain a 250 shield, 20 armor, and 20 MR. So it's just one of those solid generic support items that provide resistances for your team. Obviously, this is going to be really good in duelists. It used to be extremely broken in duelists back in the day when you can actually build this from chain plus rod, but now it's just a support item, because duelists really like resistances and living slightly longer so that they can scale and eventually have so much attack speed that they overwhelm the enemy team, right? So early game, I've seen people position like this kinda, where they put the Locket on a frontline unit, so the frontline units will walk up, and then the backline units will be able to keep that resistance. It's not like the most optimal thing or necessary, but it's important to note. Then obviously late game, when you play around your late game comp, like if you have like a faded comp, you have Syndra, this, you have something like an Ornn as well. You just want to be putting this on something that's not your main tank, in this case the Ornn, or like an Annie, and then putting it on an off tank so that you're able to put it in the middle and give the Locket value to your whole team. That's it. Just a solid item that's good in melee comps and good in most comps because it boosts frontline stats and gives you a shield. Next we have Spite. This artifact got buffed in 14.10 as well, and its average placement went from like 4.9 to an actual decent average placement with like a 4.4, I think. Let me check really quick. So right now it's averaging a 4.41, which is pretty good, and it used to average a 4.9, like I said. And the reason for this is, number one, allies within the explosion range gain 50% AD and AP for the same duration as when a unit dies, where they'll also reduce the AD and AP of enemy units within 2 hexes by 40% for 10 seconds. They buffed, I think this used to be like 30 or 40%. The main reason is duelists are so good right now that this can basically win you the duelist mirror matchup if you position well. When the unit dies that you hold Spite on, it will reduce their AD and AP. And honestly, I don't think that the ally thing is as important, because it's really hard to control where your unit dies, but generally you're going to put Spite on a frontline unit, and it's going to be really good in melee mirror matchups. So I wouldn't call it the best support item by any means, but it's still really solid and will definitely help you in those duelist or melee mirror matchups. Next we have Shroud of Stillness. I mean, this is just a classic from the olden days of TFT. It shoots a beam that 30% mana reaves enemies. Your team will also gain 60% health. It's just really positioning dependent, and in my opinion, it's a lot better late game, because late game your enemies have a lot more units to shroud. Now obviously you can punish people who clump in their team comps, like they clump with something like a RANDUI'N'S, or they have like a stationary support dummy that has Aegis and forces them to clump. You're gonna punish them with shroud. But generally, it's a lot better late game because the really impactful abilities and ultimates are all packed within the late game units. For example, units like Hui, Lissandra, high cast units with high mana thresholds will suffer a lot when they get shrouded. So I usually don't take this, but it's definitely solid in some matchups where you can definitely like almost instantly win if you shroud like a bunch of their key high mana cost units. Then obviously this item has a good synergy with the golden remover, just because you can cheese the shroud every round and you don't have to like remake the unit that you have shroud on because you're gonna move it around a bunch. Like if this unit has shroud, you need to move it depending on where the enemy team is, and then if you have remover, you can basically cheese it and put it wherever you need to. Yeah, just a solid rat item. If you take this, I'll silently judge you, but if you have to, you know, take it. Alright, so our next artifact is Aegis of the Legion. I put it in the lower end of good tier, and for one specific reason. I think it griefs your positioning pretty hard, and it can actually bait players to basically compromise their positioning mid to late game and lose fights. Combat start, it gives 25% AS and 15 armor and MR to the holder, adjacent allies in the same row, and all allies behind them for 12 seconds. So it basically grants your allies the buff in a shield or beam formation, and I think it's pretty solid early game. As I've been saying the whole time, your units really don't care early game about positioning that much. What matters more early game is like having your units focus fire the same target. If you give like all these units early game, let's say you don't have the Ornn or the Set or the Syndra, the effect of the beam, it doesn't really matter as much if you have like all of them clumped in one side. But let's say you're playing this Fated comp late game and you have these units and there's something like a Nautilus on the other team, you're straight up just cooked. Like, I see a few players greed too much value for Aegis, and they actually get destroyed by stuff like Nautilus. Lilia will feast on a board like this. Like, Azir, if he ults the backline, is just over. Like, there's so many late game threats, right? So, late game, you generally want to be... It's really awkward, but you really just want to be giving it to your, like, primary carry and, like, one of your, like, tanks, I guess. Like, something like this would work, right? Because you're declumped. I guess Nautilus could still ult here, but if you're opposite side, like, it would work. It would give it to Syndra and Thresh, and you won't grief your positioning as hard. That's why I'd really only take it early game. If you do have it late game, it's not the worst, but just be very careful about positioning your units and team comp when you have Aegis, because you don't want to get griefed. Next, we have the Eternal Flame. This artifact used to be really bad, but they actually buffed it from 6% to 8% damage increase. I mean, 2% doesn't seem like a lot, but in TFT, the smallest metrics and numbers will change a lot. So this artifact also jumped in average placement from about like a 4.7 to like a 4.5 or something. And another reason this is really good is that the Duelist comp is also pretty good, which with Duelist, it can be really hard to find like a good item holder for Morello and stuff like Red Buff. Like, Irelia is the best one, but I don't really look at any of the other units in Duelist and say, hey, like, I would love to put a Morello on my Kiana or my Volibear on my Triss. It's not that effective, right? Like, and Sunfire is not as good of a late game anti-heal item. So having the Eternal Flame in a Rising comp like Duelist is pretty good. And the damage amp definitely helps a lot, right? So the thing about the Eternal Flame also that's important to know is that it doesn't provide the burn that stuff like Morello or Sunfire provide. So it isn't as good as those items in that regard. But just solid, because if you need anti-heal really badly and you have like a decent unit to put it on, make sure the unit you put it on, by the way, doesn't die at the beginning of the fight. So you can actually have the anti-heal, right? While the holder is alive, the effect will be applied. But make sure the holder won't die. And since the support item doesn't have burn, it isn't the best source. But it's definitely solid if you don't have it. And I'd take it in a bunch of different spots where I really need the anti-heal badly. Needlessly Big Gem, Unstable Treasure Chest, and Zephyr. So next we have Unstable Treasure Chest, which is a really fun item that basically when the holder dies, the 3 closest allies gain a temporary completed item. I don't think it's that good, because even though the items are tailored, it's just pretty mediocre as a support item. Like, you can't really control where the items go, and although early game you can say it's pretty decent because it gives units more items, where obviously items are more valuable early game because people don't have the components to build completed carries and tanks, so it's gonna be better. But bro, you like go to support cache at 2-1 and it's still like pretty bad delta. The reason why is the other support items just clear this one. So stuff like Night's Vow is bad early, Eternal Flame, Gem. But like, yeah, Unstable Treasure Chest is the worst one, 2-1. It isn't even good 2-1. So yeah, I wouldn't really pick this unless you want to try out for the first time or have fun. I would pick this if you have Suspicious Trenchcoat though, because if you have Trenchcoat and Unstable Treasure Chest, you're a high roller, because all of the clones that die will spawn a treasure chest and 3 items. And basically, you'll have a total of 12 items when the clones die, each of the 3 clones, and the original unit. So it's a cool interaction. But yeah, very mid, I'd say bad item, support item right now. Alright, next we have Needlessly Big Gem. Basically, if the holder is alive after 15 seconds of combat, grant living allies 40% bonus damage. So it's literally the manifestation of the Ascension augment, where the damage is 40% instead of 50. I just think it's really bad. I would put it in not recommended, but like, you can maybe argue that there are a few comps that if they like Ascension, for example, stall comps, maybe some of the hero augments, Syndra is a stall comp that can use this, like Faded in general is good, but I'm just not a believer of this. I think all of the other options are better. Like 15 seconds is really long in a fight, and generally you can kind of tell when you're winning a fight already by 15 seconds. So I just don't think as a support item and as something that's powered around a gold augment, it's that good. It's actually worse than the gold augment itself because it's less damage, and if the holder with Ascension dies, you're cooked. You won't even ascend. So if you get randomly sniped by a Caitlyn or like Lilia dunks on your backline gem unit, GG, you're done. And just randomly, this support item actually used to give gold like in set 10. It used to be like one of the most broken support items in the game, but just removing that one aspect from it, the gold gen, made it really bad. I don't recommend it. Like, it's super niche. Like, I would put it in not recommended, but like maybe you can argue there's a few stall comps like Faded that can use it. And then lastly, you have Zephyr. I just don't think it's that good right now. This is another rat artifact. Summon a whirlwind on the opposite side of the arena that removes the closest enemy. I just think that as a support item in its current state, it's not the best. If you're like a machine that can hit the Zephyr on the enemy team consistently, so for example, you have the Kiana over here, any random unit, and you have like, I don't know, like a Sivir over here. If you can consistently hit the Zephyr, then it becomes a bit better, right? Like, this item used to be so frustrating because it used to be in the game as chain belt plus cloak, and if you like randomly find a Zephyr on carousel or can build one, it's over. But now as a support item, I don't really think it's that good because the disruption can be pretty effective. I just don't rate it the same value as an average gold augment, right? Because I rate all of these support items and artifacts in conjunction as a gold augment, because you can get it from portable forward for artifacts, or you can get it from support cache for all the support items, right? So I just don't think it's that good. Also, a lot of comps have dual carries, so if you Zephyr the, like for example, Lilia 2, there's still probably going to be some random backlane threat. And then obviously if you miss your Zephyr, this support item is just gone in value, right? Like, I'll put it in not recommended. I'm firm in this stance. If you're a god and you have maybe like golden remover, or you hit every single Zephyr, maybe I'll move it in med tier, but I just don't like it. And obviously I don't like rats, so I'll put it in not recommended. So yeah, that's it. Lastly, we're gonna have Accomplice's Gloves, which is a special type of prismatic augment item. You can get this from the prismatic augment Accomplice. Now it gives 2 gold. This used to give you 8 gold and it used to be beyond broken, but at least they fixed it now. Basically, it's just a solid prismatic augment to get in general. It rolls you random items. If you listen to me yap about all the support items or know how they work, it should be really effective. It's a lot better 2-1. It averages a 4.28 and 2-1, and yeah. That's really it. I know I yapped a lot and this video is late, so I apologize. So I really just wanted to release more YouTube videos in general and practice and talk a lot. It took me a lot of recording takes and editing to be able to release this, so I'll definitely try to release more of this type of content in the future. But I'm just really passionate about like writing stuff in general, and like TFT and these artifacts have like been really cool, where I honestly haven't found rank as cool. So I like just making random graphics and just talking a lot. So thank you so much. Please let me know any feedback, and I'll definitely be updating the artifact guide a lot more in the future whenever there's updates. Set 12 is going to be banger because there's going to be all new users for these artifacts and support items, so I'm definitely going to update there. You can get access to this by checking the description or going to bit.ly/artifact and find all information even more detailed than I have in this video over here. So thank you so much for watching. I'm definitely going to upload more stuff in the future. If you made it here, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to me yapping for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll see you next time.